The sea has always been both highway and grave. For centuries, men and women have set sail across its vastness, confident in their charts, their vessels, and their courage. Yet again and again, ships vanish. They depart from ports under clear skies, their holds full, their courses plotted, and then silence. No message, no wreckage, only the endless horizon. What makes these disappearances so haunting is not only the loss, but the details left behind. A galley where food waits, half prepared, a logbook ending mid-sentence. A ship drifting with sails set, her crew gone without a trace. From the wooden schooners of the 18th century to the steel giants of the modern age, the ocean has taken vessels large and small, leaving behind only questions. Tonight, we'll drift through 40 of these mysteries. Some are famous, like Flight 19 or the Mary Celeste. Others remain half forgotten, names whispered only in maritime archives, but all share the same unsettling rhythm. Calm seas, sudden silence, and the unanswered question that lingers. So settle in, listen closely, and let the waves carry you into the stories the ocean has never fully released. The vanishing of Flight 19, the 5th of December 1945. 5 U.S. Navy Avenger bombers lifted off from Fort Lauderdale on a training exercise. By nightfall, none would return. Static-laced transmissions, confused compass readings, and a final message, "Everything looks strange," were the last traces of Flight 19. It was a Wednesday afternoon, clear and bright along the Florida coast. The sea was calm, broken only by whitecaps rolling in the winter air. At Naval Air Station Fort Lauderdale, 14 airmen prepared for what should have been a routine training mission. The aircraft, Grumman TBM Avenger torpedo bombers, were sturdy machines widely used throughout the Second World War. Each was a single-engine craft, nearly 40 feet long, with a wingspan of 54 feet and an endurance of about 1,000 miles. Designed for the harsh conditions of combat, these planes had carried crews across the Pacific and Atlantic. On this day, however, their task was simply a 3-hour navigation exercise over. The men were confident. No one anticipated trouble. At first, everything went as planned. Radio operators tracked their course, noting the positions as the squadron passed over the coastline. Then, just after 3:40 p.m., the transmissions began to shift. Lieutenant Taylor's voice crackled through the static. His compass was malfunctioning, he reported. He could no longer determine direction. The men were certain they were flying over the Florida Keys, but in reality, they were far to the northeast, already drifting over the Atlantic. What followed was a slow unraveling. Messages became scattered, uncertain. "We can't tell where we are," one pilot said. "Everything looks wrong." Strange. Control stations tried to reorient them. "Turn west. Fly toward the setting Sunday." Yet Taylor's confusion deepened. He insisted that both compasses were out, spinning uselessly, and that the ocean below did not match the maps in his mind. The younger pilots obeyed their commander, circling with him, even as daylight began to fade. Back at the base, officers grew anxious. The final leg of the mission should have brought the bombers back within sight of Florida. Instead, radio operators heard reports of heavy seas, of instruments failing, of pilots struggling to hold formation in worsening conditions. At 6:20 p.m., Taylor's voice returned, thin and broken by static. "We can't hold much longer." The last fragment caught by listening stations was brief and haunting. "All planes close up tight. We'll have to ditch unless..." And then silence. Search and rescue operations began immediately. More than 300 boats and aircraft combed the ocean through the night and into the following days. They found nothing. No oil slicks, no floating debris, no life rafts. To add to the mystery, one of the search planes, a massive PBM Mariner with 13 men aboard, also vanished. Witnesses at sea reported seeing an explosion on the horizon that night, but no wreckage was ever recovered. For decades, investigators have revisited the Flight 19 mystery. Some suggest that faulty compasses and navigational error led the squadron deep into the Atlantic, where they ran out of fuel and ditched in rough seas. Others believe sudden weather shifts, disorientation from sun glare, or even atmospheric anomalies contributed to their loss. The Bermuda Triangle legend was born in part from this disappearance, a tale of machines and men swallowed without trace. Even today, nearly 80 years later, no confirmed wreckage of the 5 Avengers has been identified. And the last words of Lieutenant Taylor still hang in the air, carried across decades of speculation. Everything looks strange. The USS Cyclops and its 309 souls. In March 1918, the largest non-combat loss of life in US Navy history unfolded. The USS Cyclops, a massive coal ship, simply never arrived in Baltimore. With over 10,000 tons of cargo and 309 crew aboard, it left behind no distress call, no debris, and no answers. The Cyclops was no ordinary vessel. She was a Proteus-class collier, 542 feet long, displacing more than 19,000 tons when fully loaded. Built in Philadelphia and launched in 1910, she had served the Navy faithfully through the First World War, transporting coal, the essential fuel of the fleet, across oceans. Her size made her a giant of her class, a steel workhorse of America's expanding naval power. By the spring of 1918, the United States was deeply committed to the war effort, and the Cyclops was tasked with carrying manganese ore from Brazil to Baltimore, a vital material for steelmaking. She left Rio de Janeiro in February, stopping at Barbados in early March. Captain George W. Worley reported all in order. The ship was heavy with cargo, but seaworthy. Her crew of 309 men included sailors, officers, and a handful of passengers. From there, the Cyclops sailed north into the Atlantic, expected to arrive in Baltimore on March 13th. She never appeared. The disappearance was immediate and total. The ship did not send a distress call. No wireless messages hinted at trouble. Merchant ships along the route reported no sightings. It was as if the Cyclops had been lifted off the ocean entirely. The Navy launched an extensive search, sweeping the sea lanes between the Caribbean and the Chesapeake Bay. They found no wreckage, no oil slicks, no lifeboats adrift. Nothing. Speculation began almost instantly. Some suggested German U-boats, prowling the Atlantic, had torpedoed the vessel, but no records from German naval archives, examined after the war, support this theory. Others proposed sudden structural failure. The Cyclops carried over 10,000 tons of manganese ore, a cargo far denser than coal, and some naval historians have wondered whether shifting weight, combined with rough seas, could have caused her hull to crack. Yet if that were the case, one might still expect a distress signal, or some floating debris. None appeared. There were whispers too about her captain. George Worley was an experienced mariner, but reports after the disaster painted him as eccentric, even unstable. Some crewmen claimed he enforced harsh discipline, pacing the decks in full uniform at odd hours, armed with a pistol. Was there a mutiny aboard, a breakdown of order that ended in tragedy? If so, it left no trace. Geography deepened the mystery. The Cyclops vanished in a region of the western Atlantic that sailors had long regarded with unease, the stretch of ocean later called the Bermuda Triangle. Other ships and aircraft, in later decades, would vanish there as well, feeding legends of magnetic anomalies, rogue waves, even forces beyond known science. In 1918, no such theories were spoken aloud in official reports. Families of the crew waited for months, scanning newspapers for updates. By the end of the war, the Navy officially declared the Cyclops lost with all hands. President Woodrow Wilson himself remarked on the strangeness. Only God and the sea know what happened to the great ship. More than a century later, no conclusive evidence has been found. wreck hunters have scanned thousands of square miles of seafloor using sonar and submersibles, but the Cyclops has not been located. Somewhere, perhaps deep beneath the waves of the Sargasso Sea, its steel hull rests intact. Or perhaps it lies scattered, broken, hidden beneath silt. Without discovery, the story remains unresolved. 309 souls left Barbados, sailing a ship larger than many towns of its era. They vanished, not in battle, but in silence, under clear skies. And their fate, like the ocean that claimed them, remains vast, dark, and unknowable. Mary Celeste, a ship without a crew. December 1872. The Mary Celeste was discovered adrift in the Atlantic, sails intact, cargo untouched, and lifeboat missing. The crew had vanished, as if they had stepped off into thin air. For 150 years, speculation has chased their final moments. The story began with the Dei Gratia, a British brigantine sailing westward from Gibraltar. On December 4th, its crew spotted another vessel drifting some 400 miles east of the Azores. At first glance, she seemed to be sailing steadily, her sails awkward but upright, catching the winter wind, yet something about her movement was wrong. She did not answer signals. No men appeared on deck. Captain David Morehouse, a seasoned mariner, ordered a boarding party to investigate. When they stepped aboard, they found a scene frozen in time. The Mary Celeste, a 282-ton brigantine built in Nova Scotia, was seaworthy. Her cargo of over 1,700 barrels of industrial alcohol was undisturbed, packed tightly in the hold. There were no signs of battle or storm damage. The ship's supplies were plentiful. 6 months of food and water still on board. Charts and papers were scattered in the captain's cabin, but the last log entry, dated 10 days earlier, mentioned nothing unusual. What was missing was the crew. Captain Benjamin Briggs, his wife Sarah, their 2-year-old daughter Sophia, and 7 sailors had departed New York only a month before, bound for Genoa. Briggs was known as a devout, disciplined commander, unlikely to take unnecessary risks. Yet now his ship floated empty, its lifeboat gone, as though all hands had abandoned her in haste. The condition of the vessel offered few clues. The cabin was damp, but not flooded. A single pump appeared clogged, suggesting the crew may have believed the ship was taking on more water than it truly was. The binnacle, holding the ship's compass, had been disturbed. The chronometer and sextant vital for navigation were missing, along with the lifeboat. These details hinted at a possible evacuation. But why would an experienced captain order his people into a small boat hundreds of miles from land, leaving a seaworthy vessel behind? Theories flourished. Some argued that the cargo itself was to blame. Alcohol vapours seeping from the barrels might have convinced Briggs that an explosion was imminent. In panic, he could have ordered the lifeboat lowered temporarily, tethering it to the Mary Celeste by rope. A sudden squall or snapped line could have set them adrift, leaving the ship to sail on without them. Others suggested mutiny, or even piracy. Yet the ship's valuables, including the captain's personal effects and crew wages, remained untouched. Over time, the mystery deepened into legend. The British Court of Inquiry in Gibraltar, convened after the ship's arrival, found no evidence of foul play but declared the case inexplicable. The Mary Celeste continued to sail for another dozen years under new owners, but her name was shadowed by superstition. Sailors whispered of a curse, of ghostly figures glimpsed on her decks. In 1885, she met her end deliberately run aground in Haiti in a failed insurance fraud. By then, however, her true story had already taken root in the world's imagination. For historians, the facts remain simple. An able ship, abandoned under calm conditions, with provisions intact and no definitive reason for departure. For storytellers, it is a perfect canvas. a tale that blends maritime history with the eerie suggestion that the sea sometimes swallows men, not with violence, but with silence. To this day, no diary, no survivor, no wrecked lifeboat has ever surfaced to explain the fate of Captain Briggs, his family, and his crew. The Atlantic keeps their story unfinished, and so the Mary Celeste sails on in memory, a ship without a crew, forever adrift between fact and legend. The disappearance of the Joyita. In 1955, the cargo ship Joyita was found drifting in the South Pacific. Its decks were empty, radio dismantled, and lifeboats gone. The logbook's last entry gave no warning, and the mystery of her vanished passengers has never been solved. The Joyita was a 69-foot wooden merchant vessel built in Los Angeles in 1931. Originally designed as a luxury yacht, she was later repurposed for military and cargo duties, serving during the Second World War as a patrol boat. By the mid-1952s, she was a working vessel once more, carrying freight and passengers between small Pacific islands. On October 3, 1955, she departed Samoa, bound for the Tokelau Islands, a journey of about 270 nautical miles. On board were 25 people crew, passengers, and a cargo of medical supplies, food, and trade goods. The trip was expected to take less than 2 days. When she failed to arrive on schedule, concern quickly mounted. Search planes combed the waters between Samoa and Tokelau. Days passed, weeks passed, no word, no wreckage, no survivors. Then, 5 weeks later, on November 10th, a British merchant vessel spotted a drifting silhouette 600 miles off course, northwest of Fiji. It was the Joyita. Boarding parties found a scene that raised more questions than it answered. The ship was listing heavily to port, partially flooded but still afloat. Her hull, built of Oregon pine and lined with cork, made her nearly unsinkable. Her cargo was scattered, with crates and supplies missing. The lifeboats, however, were gone, cut loose from their davits. Most puzzling of all, the ship's radio had been dismantled, its wiring carefully removed, as if someone had deliberately disabled it. The Joyita's engine was not running. Though there was fuel on board, a clutch connecting the engine to the propeller shaft was broken, leaving her adrift. The logbook, navigational charts, and the captain's papers were all missing. Blood-stained bandages were discovered on deck, though no explanation for them could be found. In the galley, cups of tea and a meal seemed abandoned mid-preparation. As though interrupted, investigators pieced together what little they could. The flooding that caused her list appeared to have come from a leaking pipe, but the pumps were clogged with debris. Some experts suggested the crew may have panicked, believing the ship was sinking, and evacuated in lifeboats. Yet abandoning a cork-lined vessel so resistant to sinking seemed irrational. Others pointed to the carefully dismantled radio, not the work of men in a panic, but of someone acting methodically. Why disable communication during a crisis? Theories spiraled outward. Some believed pirates boarded her, seizing cargo and forcing the crew overboard. Though no clear evidence of violence was found, others suggested insurance fraud or a mutiny that went fatally wrong. In the islands of the South Pacific, whispers grew darker still that the ship had sailed into waters cursed, where sailors were swallowed without trace. What is certain is that none of the 25 people aboard were ever seen again. No bodies, no lifeboats, no confirmed wreckage of their escape craft was recovered. The South Pacific, vast and indifferent, closed over them. The Joyita herself was eventually salvaged, repaired, and returned to service, but her reputation was ruined. Sailors called her the ghost ship of the Pacific. Superstitions clung to her decks, and each new voyage carried the shadow of the vanished crew. She changed hands several times before being finally abandoned in a Fijian harbour in the 1970 seconds, left to rot until her hull collapsed. To this day, historians sift through the sparse evidence. Was it a simple mechanical failure compounded by human error? Or did something stranger occur in those silent seas? Without the crew, the lifeboats, or the missing records, the Joy-Eater's fate cannot be fully known. A vessel designed never to sink did not sink. Instead, she drifted empty, silent, and enduring, and her 25 passengers remain among the Pacific's most enduring mysteries, their story carried only by the waves. The Ellen Austin's ghost ship encounter. In 1881, the Ellen Austin sighted a derelict vessel in the Sargasso Sea. When crew were sent to sail her back, the ship vanished. Days later, it reappeared again deserted. Each time men boarded, each time the vessel was found abandoned. The Ellen Austin was an American packet ship, a sturdy wooden vessel built for long transatlantic voyages. By the summer of 1881, she was en route from London to New York, carrying a cargo of goods and a full complement of passengers. The crossing had been routine until she entered the strange, wind-stilled waters of the Sargasso Sea, a region of the North Atlantic known for its glassy calm and its vast mats of floating seaweed. Sailors had long whispered of the Sargasso, calling it a graveyard of ships. Here, they said, vessels could drift for months, their sails rotting, their crews gone. On a hazy afternoon, the lookout of the Ellen Austin spotted a ship on the horizon. At first, the silhouette appeared normal, masts upright, sails ragged but standing. But as they drew closer, Captain Baker and his crew realized something was wrong. No flags flew from her rigging. No men appeared on deck. The vessel was adrift, moving only with the current. Cautiously, a boarding party was sent across. They climbed aboard and found the ship eerily intact. Her cargo was secure. Provisions remained in the hold, yet not a soul was to be found. No logbook lay open to explain where the crew had gone. It was as though they had walked off into the air. Captain Baker faced a decision. To leave the ship adrift was to abandon valuable cargo, but to bring her in meant risking men to sail a vessel whose fate was already uncertain. At last he chose to put a prize crew aboard skilled sailors from the Ellen Austin, who would take command of the ghost ship and sail her alongside back to New York. For 2 days, the plan appeared to work. Both ships moved westward, separated only by a few miles of open sea. Then, a storm rolled in. Heavy winds and mist closed the horizon, and when the skies cleared, the derelict was gone. The Ellen Austin searched, and eventually, the ghost ship was found again. But when Baker sent another party aboard, the vessel was empty once more. The men he had placed there had vanished, leaving the same silence that had greeted them before. Some accounts even claim the process repeated, with yet another crew sent aboard, and yet again the ship reappearing, abandoned, as if cursed to remain forever unmanned. The story spread quickly through maritime circles. In the late 19th century, reports of ghost ships were not uncommon, but the persistence of this tale set it apart. Was it an exaggeration? A sailor's yarn told in smoky taverns? Or had the Ellen Austin truly encountered a ship doomed to repeat its mystery? Skeptics point out that few contemporary records confirm the tale, and much of what we know comes from retellings in newspapers and sea stories published decades later. Some versions name the derelict as a schooner, others leave her nameless. Details shift, but the core remains: a ship, found empty, crewed again, and found empty once more. Even so, the legend resonates because it mirrors so many other vanishings at sea. Ships discovered without crews, the Mary Celeste, the Joy-Eater, and others remind us that the ocean does not always explain its losses. A lifeboat gone, a deck swept clean, a logbook missing, always silence where there should be voices. Today, the Ellen Austin herself is long gone, broken up after years of service. But her ghost ship encounter still drifts in the collective memory of maritime lore. Was it misfortune, mutiny, or something stranger in the calm waters of the Sargasso? No one can say. The ship that reappeared again and again has faded into history, and like the sea that held it, the truth remains wide, dark, and unknowable. The SS Waratah, Australia's Titanic, nicknamed the Titanic of the South. The Waratah disappeared in 1909 with 211 people aboard. She was last seen off the South African coast, sailing steadily, then never again. Despite decades of searches, no wreck has ever been confirmed. The Waratah was a passenger liner built in Scotland in 1908 for the Blue Anchor Line. At 465 feet long, with a tonnage of nearly 10,000, she was designed as a dual-purpose vessel, part cargo carrier, part luxury liner. Her passenger decks boasted elegant dining rooms, electric lighting, and plush cabins, while her holds carried tons of freight between Britain, South Africa, and Australia. For a time, she was hailed as a triumph of modern design, Australia's answer to the Atlantic liners of Europe. On the 26th of July 1909, the Waratah departed Durban, bound for Cape Town with 211 souls aboard a mix of passengers and crew. Among them were businessmen, families, and immigrants, many eager to make their way across the seas. The weather was clear, the ship's engines were strong. Nothing suggested the voyage would be her last. That morning, she was spotted by the steamer Clan McIntyre, travelling steadily westward. The captain of the Clan McIntyre noted her progress, exchanged routine signals, and carried on. It was the last confirmed sighting of the Waratah. By nightfall, she was gone. When she failed to arrive in Cape Town, concern turned to alarm. Search vessels swept the seas for weeks. Wireless stations scanned for signals, but no wreckage was found, no lifeboats, no bodies, not even cargo adrift. Inquiries followed. Some pointed to her design, with a tall superstructure, heavy cargo below, and passenger decks stacked high. Critics suggested she may have been top-heavy, vulnerable to capsizing in heavy seas. Survivors from earlier voyages recalled unsettling rolls, moments when the ship seemed unstable, yet others argued that she had weathered storms before with no difficulty. And her builders insisted she was as sound as any ship afloat. Rumours soon clouded the investigation. Some claimed survivors had been spotted on remote coasts. Others insisted that wreckage had washed ashore but been quietly covered up. Families clung to these reports, but none were ever verified. Over time, conspiracy gave way to a simpler truth. The sea had taken her whole. The South African coast is notorious for treacherous currents and sudden storms. One possibility is that the Waratah encountered a freak wave, a towering wall of water, now recognised by oceanographers but scarcely believed in 1909. Such a wave could have overwhelmed her in moments, leaving little chance for survivors. Another theory is that she capsized, turning turtle so quickly that lifeboats could not be launched. For decades, expeditions have sought her remains. In the late 20th century, as technology advanced, sonar sweeps and dives were mounted along the suspected route. Several promising sites were explored, shadows on the seabed, twisted metal glimpsed by submersibles, but none were definitively identified as the Waratah. In 1999, a wreck was located deep off the Transkei coast and initially thought to be her, but analysis later proved it to be another vessel. The Waratah continues to elude discovery. Her fate has become part of maritime folklore in South Africa and Australia. To many, she embodies the fear of the sea's suddenness. A modern ship, steady at dawn, gone by dusk, without a single trace. Her nickname, the Titanic of the South, is less about grandeur than about loss. Hundreds of lives taken in an instant, with no explanation. Today, more than a century later, her absence endures. Somewhere along the rugged African seabed, beneath miles of shifting currents, the Waratah almost certainly rests. But until she is found, she belongs not to the history books, but to legend a ship that sailed into clear seas and never returned. The HMS Erebus and Terror in Arctic ice. The 1,845 Franklin expedition sailed into the Northwest Passage and vanished. For over a century, Inuit oral history and scattered relics were the only clues. When the wrecks were finally located under Arctic ice, they only deepened questions about starvation, cannibalism, and strange lead poisoning. It was the age of polar exploration. Britain, proud of its navy and eager for glory, dreamed of completing the Northwest Passage, a sea route threading through Canada's Arctic archipelago to link the Atlantic and Pacific. Sir John Franklin, a veteran officer of 60 years, was chosen to lead the mission. 2 ships, HMS Erebus and HMS Terror, both reinforced with iron plating and fitted with auxiliary steam engines, set sail from England in May 1845. Aboard were 129 officers and crew, confident in the mission and provisioned for 3 years at sea. At first, all went well. Whalers encountered the expedition in Baffin Bay that July, reporting the ships in good order. It was the last confirmed sighting. From then on, silence. The years passed, with no return. Families waited for letters that never came. Britain launched rescue missions, scouring the Arctic in the largest search operation of the 19th century. They found traces, tins, boots, abandoned campsites, and graves marked with the names of men who had perished early. But no ships, no survivors. Inuit oral history preserved fragments of what happened. Elders spoke of starving men dragging boats across the ice, of bodies found in tents, of ghostly ships trapped in pack ice until they slipped beneath the sea. These accounts were long dismissed by some European investigators, but over time they proved strikingly accurate. By the 1,850 seconds, the grim picture began to emerge. By April of the following year, the surviving officers had abandoned the ships and set out on foot. None were seen alive again. Later analysis of bones unearthed from the campsites revealed deep-cut marks, consistent with cannibalism. Desperate men carving flesh in their final days. The revelation shocked Victorian society, but Inuit testimony had suggested it all along. Yet even the most basic questions remained unanswered. What had trapped 2 modern ships so completely? Why had so many men died so quickly? In the late 20th century, scientists studied preserved remains of crew buried in permafrost. Hair samples revealed unnaturally high levels of lead, likely from poorly sealed food tins and the ship's water system. Lead poisoning can cause confusion, fatigue, and hallucinations, conditions that may have crippled the crew's ability to survive. Still, this did not explain everything. For more than 150 years, the wrecks themselves remained hidden, locked under ice and sea. Then, in 2014, Canadian searchers located HMS Erebus in shallow waters off King William Island. 2 years later, HMS Terror was found as well, astonishingly preserved in deeper water. Inside, tables were set, maps intact, and equipment stored neatly, as if the crew had simply stepped away. The discovery confirmed parts of the Inuit accounts but raised fresh mysteries. Why had the ships been deserted when they appeared, at least for a time, still seaworthy? Why had the men chosen a nearly impossible march south rather than remain aboard? Even with the wrecks mapped and artifacts recovered, the story resists neat resolution. The Franklin expedition has become not only a tale of exploration, but of human fragility, of ambition meeting the limits of endurance. The ice still holds much of the evidence. Each summer thaw reveals more scraps of clothing, fragments of journals, tools frozen in time. And yet, the central questions remain. How exactly did 129 men aboard 2 of Britain's most advanced ships vanish into silence? The Erebus and Terror rest quietly beneath Arctic waters, their decks cloaked in silt and ice. They are monuments not of triumph, but of mystery ships whose final voyage remains unfinished, and whose story drifts, unresolved, between history and legend. The Kaz 2 Catamaran Mystery. In 2007, Australian authorities found the Kaz 2 drifting off Queensland. Meals were laid out, laptops on, engine running, but the 3 sailors aboard had vanished, leaving a scene eerily described as like they had just stepped outside. Have peered, Mike reasoned Edid. The Kaz 2 was a 12-metre catamaran, sleek and modern, designed for coastal cruising. Owned by a Queensland businessman, she had been equipped with reliable navigation gear, twin engines, and comfortable living quarters. On April 15, 2007, she set out from Airlie Beach in the Whitsundays. Bound for Townsville, a journey of just 25 nautical miles. Aboard were 3 men. 5 6-year-old skipper, Derek Batten, and brothers Peter and James Toonstead, aged 69 and 63. All 3 were experienced yachtsmen. Friends described them as cautious, not prone to unnecessary risks. For the first 2 days, nothing appeared unusual. The men phoned family members, reporting calm seas and good spirits. Then, on April 20th, a Coast Guard aircraft spotted the Kaz 2 drifting about 88 nautical miles off the coast near Townsville. There was no response to radio calls. Rescue crews boarded and were met with one of the strangest scenes in maritime history. Inside the cabin, everything was in order. The engine was running, fuel full. A laptop was open on the chart table. Switched on. A meal had been laid out in the galley, half-eaten food, utensils still in place. Fishing lines trailed into the sea from the stern. Clothes were neatly folded in cabins. Life jackets remained on board, but of the 3 sailors, there was no trace. The sails told a troubling story. One was badly shredded, flapping loose, while another hung awkwardly rigged. Investigators believed it suggested an incident involving sudden strong winds, but why had none of the men donned life vests, launched a distress call, or even left signs of struggle? The yacht was entirely seaworthy, showing no signs of collision, grounding, or fire. Australian authorities launched a major search, covering thousands of square miles of ocean. Aircraft scanned the waters, ships scoured the currents. They found nothing. No bodies, no lifeboat, no floating gear. The men had vanished as completely as if the sea had swallowed them whole. The official coroner's inquiry, held 2 years later, pieced together a possible chain of events. It suggested that one of the brothers may have been trying to free a fishing line caught in the rudder. Perhaps he slipped overboard. In an attempt to rescue him, a second man may have followed, or been knocked into the water. The third, rushing to help, might also have been lost. With no one left aboard, the Kaz 2 drifted on. It was a tragic but plausible scenario, yet many remain unconvinced. If all 3 men went overboard, why was no distress call made? Why did none grab life jackets? And how could 3 experienced sailors vanish so quickly in broad daylight on calm seas? Some have argued that piracy or foul play may have been involved, but no evidence of intrusion was ever found. Others speculate about rogue waves or sudden microbursts of wind. In the absence of proof, every theory remains only that a theory. The mystery of the Kaz 2 struck a chord because of its eerie familiarity. Unlike 19th century ghost ships adrift in the Atlantic, this was a modern yacht in busy Australian waters with electronic equipment still humming. The image of an empty catamaran, table set, engine running, is the stuff of maritime legend brought into the present day. To this day, the fate of Derek Batten and the Toonstead brothers is unknown. Their families received no closure, only the silent, drifting vessel as evidence. The Kaz 2 was eventually returned to her owners, but she carried a shadow, a reminder of how, even in the modern age of GPS and satellites, the ocean still holds the power to make men vanish without a trace. And like so many mysteries of the sea, the questions linger. 3 sailors, a functioning yacht, calm seas, and nothing left behind but an unfinished meal and silence. MV Derbyshire, the giant that vanished. The Derbyshire, the largest British ship ever lost at sea, went missing in Typhoon Orchid in 1980 with 44 crew. For years it was presumed swallowed whole until wreckage was found 15,000 feet deep. The discovery raised even more questions about how a ship that size could fail so suddenly. The Derbyshire was a colossus of the seas, a 294-metre oil bulk ore carrier launched in 1976. Built to haul iron ore and oil across oceans, she weighed more than 91,000 gross tons and could carry 157,000 metric tons of cargo. She was the pride of British shipbuilding, a floating fortress of steel, considered too vast and too modern to simply disappear. In September 1980, the Derbyshire left Canada bound for Kawasaki, Japan. Her holds were filled with 157,000 tons of iron ore, a cargo that made her sit low in the water. Her crew of 42 men and 2 women, including the captain's wife, expected the crossing to be routine. But as they neared the South China Sea, nature turned violent. Typhoon Orchid had formed, churning winds above 100 miles per hour and waves towering 15 meters. Many ships diverted. The Derbyshire pressed on. Her last communication was a brief radio message on September 9th. It was routine, calm, and unremarkable. Then, silence. The Derbyshire failed to arrive in Japan. Days stretched into weeks as hope faded. No distress signal had been sent. No life rafts were sighted. The world's largest British-built merchant ship had disappeared as completely as a fishing skiff. For years, the mystery haunted the families of the crew. Some believed the ship had suffered a sudden structural failure, breaking apart under the force of typhoon seas. Others thought she may have capsized if waves overwhelmed her bow. But with no wreckage, no evidence, the theories were speculation. Insurance companies and investigators listed her as a total loss, her fate unresolved. Then, in 1987, a breakthrough came. Pieces of wreckage were spotted floating off the Japanese coast lifeboats, hatch covers, fragments of steel. These scraps suggested violent destruction, not slow sinking. Still, the full picture remained hidden beneath miles of water. It was not until the mid-1990s, after years of campaigning by the relatives of the lost crew, that advanced sonar and submersible surveys were launched to find her. In 1997, deep-sea imaging revealed the truth. The Derbyshire lay in 2 massive sections, scattered across the seabed nearly 15,000 feet down. The wreck was astonishingly intact for its depth. Her bow and stern separated, but her vast hull largely preserved. Investigators studied every frame of footage. What they found was shocking. The evidence showed that the Derbyshire had not simply capsized. She had been overwhelmed by waves that forced water through her forward hatches. Once the hatch covers buckled under pressure, the sea poured into her cargo holds. With tens of thousands of tons of water rushing inside, the immense vessel lost buoyancy in minutes. She had gone down bow first, plunging nearly vertically, tearing apart as she sank. There had been no time for a distress call, but the discovery raised deeper concerns. How could a ship so large, built with modern standards, be so vulnerable? If the Derbyshire could fail in this way, so could other bulk carriers. Indeed, studies later showed that more than 100 similar ships had been lost worldwide, often without warning, their hatches unable to withstand extreme wave pressure. The Derbyshire's legacy is therefore more than a tragedy, it is a lesson. Her loss led to international reforms in shipbuilding, requiring stronger hatch designs and stricter safety regulations. Yet for the families of the 44 aboard, reforms were not enough. They wanted answers. Why had their loved ones, aboard one of the strongest ships ever built, vanished without trace for so long. The ocean floor has given us fragments of truth, but not certainty. Even now, experts debate the role of rogue waves, cargo weight, and structural stress. The Derbyshire rests in silence beneath 15,000 feet of water, her steel hull still bearing witness. And the questions remain. If such a giant can fall so swiftly, what else might the sea still keep hidden, waiting beneath its endless waves? Carroll A. Deering, the ghost schooner. In 1921, the five-masted schooner Carroll A. Deering ran aground on Diamond Shoals. Its crew had vanished, lifeboats were gone, and galley food was mid-preparation. The FBI investigated sabotage, piracy, even mutiny, but concluded nothing. The Carroll A. Deering was one of the last great windjammers built on the east coast of the United States. Completed in 1,919 inches, Bath, Maine, she stretched 255 feet in length, with 5 towering masts and vast sails designed to capture the trade winds. Like many vessels of her era, she carried cargoes of coal and lumber along Atlantic routes that stretched from the ports of South America to New England. By January 1921, the schooner had already proven herself seaworthy, having completed several long voyages. On this fateful trip, she departed Rio de Janeiro, bound for Norfolk, Virginia, carrying a load of coal. Her master was Captain William H. Merritt, an experienced sailor, but illness forced him to disembark in Delaware shortly after departure. Command passed to Captain W.B. Wormel, a man familiar with the vessel but older and less robust. The crew included 10 men, mostly Scandinavians, along with the captain's son. The last confirmed sighting of the Carroll A. Deering came on the 28th of January 1921. A passing lightship near Cape Lookout, North Carolina, reported her sailing unusually close to shore. The lightship's keeper noted that a thin, red-haired man, not the captain, hailed them from the deck, reporting that the vessel had lost its anchors. It was a strange message. Why had the captain not spoken? Why had a crewman delivered the call instead? The lightship noted the sighting and continued on. 2 days later, on January 31st, the schooner was found aground on Diamond Shoals, a treacherous stretch of sandbars off Cape Hatteras, often called the graveyard of the Atlantic. Rescuers boarded and found a scene frozen in mid-activity. The galley contained food half prepared, knives laid out for bread and stew. The crew's personal belongings were gone, but the cargo remained untouched. The Coast Guard launched an immediate investigation. At first, they suspected mutiny. Some reports claimed Captain Wormel had quarrelled with his men in Barbados weeks earlier, but no evidence of violence was found on board. Others whispered of piracy. In the years after World War I, the Atlantic coast saw its share of criminal activity, smugglers and raiders prowling the shipping lanes. Could the Carroll A. Deering have fallen prey to such men, her crew forced into lifeboats and silenced? Yet there were no signs of struggle, no stolen goods, no ransom notes. Even more curious was the FBI's involvement. In an unusual step, federal agents joined the inquiry, considering sabotage or even foreign interference. This was the age of post-war paranoia, when fears of Bolshevik subversion coloured American politics. But after months of interviews and fieldwork, the Bureau quietly closed the file. The official record concluded nothing. Over the decades, theories multiplied. Some blamed hurricanes, suggesting the crew abandoned ship in panic after she struck rough seas. Others imagined rogue waves sweeping the men overboard. Still, others pointed to the eerie history of Diamond Shoals itself, a place where hundreds of ships have come to grief, their timbers swallowed by shifting sand and their crews lost to silence. To this day, no definitive explanation exists. The crew of the Carroll A. Deering vanished into history, leaving only the ghostly shell of their vessel behind. For locals along the Outer Banks, the story became part of a tapestry of shipwreck lore. sailors warned of the cursed schooner, whose bones, half buried in sand, stood as a monument to mystery. The wreck of the Carol A. Deering was eventually destroyed by storms and salvage, but her legend remains. She is remembered as the ghost ship of the Outer Banks, a vessel abandoned in haste, caught between fact and folklore. And like the food left half-prepared in her galley, her story remains unfinished, a meal the sea itself chose never to complete. The Disappearance of Flight 2501, June 1950. Northwest Orient Flight 2501 with 58 aboard vanished over Lake Michigan. Radio calls ended abruptly, wreckage was never found, and divers still search today in one of America's largest inland maritime mysteries. The flight began without incident. On the evening of June 23rd, Northwest Orient Airlines, Flight 2501 departed New York's LaGuardia Airport, bound for Seattle, with planned stops in Minneapolis and Spokane. The aircraft was a Douglas DC-4, a four-engine airliner widely used in the post-war years, considered dependable and safe. Captain Robert Lind was in command, with 17 years of flying experience and more than 8,000 hours in the air. On board were 55 passengers, businessmen, servicemen returning home, families, and travelers along with a crew of 3. The flight proceeded smoothly across the Midwest, but by the time it neared Lake Michigan, the conditions had worsened. Storm cells brewed over the lake, with winds gusting and lightning flashing across the horizon. At 11:13 p.m., as the DC-4 approached the shoreline near Milwaukee, Captain Lind requested clearance to descend from 3,500 feet to 2,500 feet to avoid turbulence. The request was denied because of heavy air traffic in the area. Minutes later, Flight 2501 vanished from radar. No distress call followed, no flares, no signals. The aircraft simply ceased to exist in the night sky. Search efforts began at dawn. Aircraft scoured the lake, while boats combed the surface for debris. The first signs of tragedy appeared the next day. Seat cushions, fragments of upholstery, pieces of luggage, and human remains washing ashore near South Haven, Michigan. But of the aircraft itself, its fuselage, its engines, its black box, nothing was found. For weeks, the US Coast Guard and Navy dragged the lake with grappling equipment. Sonar sweeps probed the depths. But Lake Michigan is vast, with shifting sands and strong undercurrents that quickly conceal wreckage. By July, the official search was abandoned, leaving families with only fragments and unanswered questions. Speculation soon followed. Some investigators believed the aircraft had been torn apart by severe thunderstorms. Lake Michigan's unpredictable weather is notorious, capable of generating sudden downdrafts strong enough to bring down even large aircraft. Others suggested structural failure, though the DC-4 had no known history of catastrophic weakness. There were even whispers, in the early Cold War climate, of military involvement, with rumours that a government radar test or secret project might have interfered with the flight, but no evidence supported such theories. In the decades since, the mystery has lingered. Divers and shipwreck hunters have searched Lake Michigan's depths repeatedly, hoping to find the DC-4's final resting place. The Michigan Shipwreck Research Association has led many expeditions, mapping sections of the lake bed with sonar. They have discovered dozens of shipwrecks, wooden schooners, steamers, and barges lost to the lake over centuries, but not Flight 2501. Each year, new leads are explored, yet the DC-4 remains elusive. The human side of the story has never faded. 58 lives ended that night, their families left without bodies to bury or wreckage to mourn over. For many relatives, the absence of a grave has made the loss harder to accept. Memorials have been erected in South Haven, where debris washed ashore, as a reminder of the tragedy that still waits for answers. More than 70 years have passed, and still Lake Michigan holds its secret. Modern sonar can map terrain thousands of feet deep in the ocean, yet this inland sea continues to resist. The DC-4 could lie buried beneath shifting sands, or broken into pieces scattered across the floor. Until it is found, the disappearance of Flight 2501 remains both a tragedy and a legend. One of America's greatest unresolved aviation mysteries, and on calm nights, when the lake is glassy and still, locals say it is difficult not to look toward the horizon and wonder what lies hidden beneath, waiting in the silence below. The S. Orang Medan's distress call. A chilling SOS reached ships in 1947. All officers, including captain, are dead. I die. When rescuers arrived, the Orang Medan was littered with corpses, faces frozen in horror. Moments later, the ship burst into flames and sank. The story begins in the Strait of Malacca, one of the busiest shipping lanes in the world. In June of 1947, Morse code operators aboard nearby vessels received a frantic series of transmissions. The sender identified his ship as the Orang Medan, a freighter of Dutch registry. The messages were broken, the key uncertain, but the words were clear enough to send chills across the airwaves. First came, "All officers, including captain, are dead, lying in chart room and bridge, possibly whole crew dead." Minutes later, one final line was tapped out. "I die." Then silence. Nearby ships, including the American vessel Silver Star, responded. Using the coordinates provided in the faint transmissions, they located the Orang Medan adrift in calm seas. She appeared undamaged, riding steady in the water. But when boarding parties climbed aboard, they were met with one of the most disturbing scenes in maritime history. The deck was littered with bodies. Crewmen lay sprawled, faces twisted into grotesque expressions, eyes wide open, mouths frozen mid-scream. The captain was dead on the bridge, officers in the chart room, engineers near the engine. Even the ship's dog was found lifeless, teeth bared in a snarl. Strangely, there were no wounds, no blood, no signs of violence. It was as if an invisible force had struck all at once. The ship's condition only deepened the mystery. The radio equipment was intact, though the operator who had sent the SOS was found slumped dead beside it. Lifeboats remained in place, untouched. Cargo holds contained barrels, said to be filled with chemicals. Though records of what they held were unclear, the temperature of the steel decks felt unnaturally cold despite the tropical sun, according to some later accounts. As the rescuers prepared to tow the vessel back to port, smoke began to rise from below deck. The boarding party barely escaped before the Orang Medan exploded in a blast so violent it lifted the freighter from the sea. When the smoke cleared, nothing remained but drifting debris. The ship, and whatever secrets it carried, sank to the bottom of the strait. Theories have multiplied in the decades since. Some suggest leaking chemical cargo released toxic gases, suffocating or poisoning the crew, their bodies contorted by convulsions. Others propose carbon monoxide from a faulty boiler. A darker speculation imagines the vessel carrying illegal chemical weapons, part of the black market trade that thrived in the aftermath of World War II. Without cargo manifests or survivors, such theories cannot be proved. Skeptics have questioned whether the Orang Medan existed at all. Records of her construction or registry are scarce. Some maritime historians argue the tale may be exaggerated or even fictional, a sailor's story embellished into legend. Yet, the consistency of details across multiple retellings suggests a core event, a distress call, a boarding, a fire may indeed have taken place. For those who believe, the mystery is what makes the story endure. How could dozens of men die simultaneously without injury? What was in the holds that burned so furiously it destroyed the ship in moments? And why has no definitive record of the Orang Medan ever been found? The Strait of Malacca remains one of the busiest shipping routes on Earth, but beneath its waves may lie the wreck of a ghost ship that carried one of the strangest maritime puzzles of the 20th century. Until it is discovered, if it exists at all, the Orang Medan drifts in memory only a ship of corpses, swallowed by flame and sea, leaving behind only the echo of its final words, "I die." The Andrea Gale and the Perfect Storm. In October 1991, the Andrea Gale was last heard from off Newfoundland. The storm that claimed her immortalized in books and film left no wreckage and no survivors, only speculation about her crew's final hours. The Andrea Gale was a 72-foot commercial fishing vessel based in Gloucester, Massachusetts. She was built for hard seas, with a steel hull and twin diesel engines, designed to haul swordfish from the rich but dangerous waters of the North Atlantic. In the fall of 1991, she was captained by Billy Tyne, an experienced skipper who knew both the risks and the rewards of deep-sea fishing. His crew of 5, David Sullivan, Bobby Shatford, Michael Moran, Alfred Pierre, and Dale Murphy, were men accustomed to grueling days, hauling lines in icy spray for the promise of big catches. The voyage began in late September. The Andrea Gale sailed east toward the Grand Banks of Newfoundland, one of the most productive fishing grounds in the world. After days at sea, the crew filled the hold with a sizable catch. By October 27th, with weather worsening, they turned for home, but the decision to cross back coincided with a meteorological collision of rare ferocity. That autumn, a cold front from the Great Lakes swept east, colliding with warm air moving north from the tropics. At the same time, Hurricane Grace spun up from the Atlantic, adding tropical moisture and wind to the mix. The convergence created what meteorologists later called the perfect storm, a system that produced waves reported at 30 to 50 feet, with some surges possibly higher than 100 feet. On October 28th, the Andrea Gale made her last known communication. In a routine radio call, Captain Tyne reported heavy weather but gave no indication of alarm. His position was logged east of Nova Scotia. After that, silence. The following morning, the Coast Guard attempted contact. No response came. As the storm battered the Atlantic, rescue aircraft and cutters were dispatched. They searched for days across thousands of square miles. Debris from other vessels was sighted, but nothing from the Andrea Gale. Eventually, fragments began to surface. Empty fuel drums, buoys, bits of line. But no hull, no life raft, no bodies. The sea had erased her completely. The tragedy became the subject of investigation. Some experts suggested the vessel may have been overwhelmed by a rogue wave, one of the towering anomalies that strike without warning. Others argued that ice buildup, mechanical failure, or downflooding water pouring through hatches might have caused her to founder. Yet, without wreckage, no firm conclusion could be reached. The story of the Andrea Gale grew larger in the years that followed. In 1997, Sebastian Junger's book The Perfect Storm recounted both the science of the weather system and the human cost of life at sea. The book later became a Hollywood film, fixing the vessel's name into popular memory. But beyond the narrative, the reality remained unchanged. 6 men went to sea and did not return. For the families in Gloucester, the loss was deeply personal. Gloucester has a long history of fishermen lost at sea, more than 10,000 over 4 centuries. The names of the Andrea Gale's crew were added to that roll of honour. Memorials on the waterfront still bear witness, with stone plaques etched with names, flowers often laid at their base. The Andrea Gale has never been found. Somewhere beneath the Atlantic, she lies in silence, her hull buried under miles of water. What happened in her final hours is known only to the sea. Did she face a single monstrous wave? Did her engines fail at the worst moment? Or did her crew battle until the very end, swallowed gradually by the storm? The questions remain unanswered, and the Andrea Gale, like so many ships before her, endures as both a tragedy and a legend, a vessel lost in the greatest storm of her time. leaving behind only echoes of her last call and the endless roll of the sea. SS Edmund Fitzgerald's final song, November 1975. A massive freighter sank in Lake Superior with 29 men aboard. The Edmund Fitzgerald's final radio call was calm. "We are holding our own," before she disappeared beneath 530 feet of water. The Edmund Fitzgerald was the pride of the Great Lakes shipping fleet. At 729 feet long, she was the largest vessel ever to sail the inland seas when launched in 1958. Nicknamed the Mighty Fitz, she hauled iron ore from mines near Duluth to steel mills on the lower lakes. Her sleek profile and power earned her respect among sailors, and her record-setting cargo hauls made her legendary. On the 9th of November 1975, the Fitzgerald departed Superior, Wisconsin, loaded with 26,000 tons of taconite pellets. Captain Ernest McSorley commanded 29 men, all experienced sailors. The weather forecast called for rough seas, but nothing extraordinary. That night, a storm system deepened unexpectedly, building into one of the most violent November gales in Lake Superior history. By the next day, winds exceeded 60 knots, and waves rose more than 25 feet. Snow squalls reduced visibility to near zero. McSorley, in radio contact with another freighter, the Arthur M. Anderson, reported damage, lost radar, downed vents, and listing. Yet he remained calm. At 7:10 p.m., he gave his final transmission. "We are holding our own." Minutes later, the Fitzgerald vanished from radar. No distress call was sent, no lifeboats were launched. When rescue attempts reached the scene, only debris was found, lifeboats broken, life vests floating unused, and scattered wreckage. The 29 men were gone, with no bodies recovered. In 1976, the Coast Guard investigated. Theories included structural failure, rogue waves, and water flooding through hatch covers. Later dives confirmed the Fitzgerald had broken in two, her bow upright and her stern overturned. Yet no single cause was ever confirmed. The tragedy captured public attention. Gordon Lightfoot's haunting ballad, "The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald," turned the story into legend, memorializing the men and their final hours. To this day, every November, ceremonies are held at Whitefish Point to honor the crew. The Fitzgerald story endures because of its silence. A final calm call, a sudden disappearance, and a ship once thought invincible lost within minutes. The Great Lakes, often called inland seas, remind us that even without salt water or ocean storms, their power is absolute. MV, Blythe Star's sudden loss. In 1973, the Blythe Star disappeared off Tasmania. The wreck was only found decades later. Survivors described days adrift, but what sank the small freighter so quickly remained unclear. The MV Blythe Star was a coastal freighter, modest in size at just over 43 meters long. She carried food, goods, and supplies around Tasmania's rugged coastline. On the 13th of October 1973, she left Hobart bound for King Island with a crew of 10. The sea was calm, and the voyage was expected to take only a few days. Yet on October 14th, the Blythe Star suddenly capsized and sank without warning. The crew barely escaped in a small inflatable raft. With no time to send a distress call, the vessel slipped beneath the waves, taking with her any clear evidence of what went wrong. For 10 long days, the survivors drifted in open seas. They battled hunger, thirst, and exhaustion, huddled against the cold winds of the Southern Ocean. Several died before help arrived. The survivors who were rescued told of a sudden list and rapid sinking, but none could explain why the freighter had failed so completely. The wreck remained missing for more than 3 decades. Finally, in 2002, marine surveyors located her 150 meters below the surface off Tasmania's south coast. She lay upright on the seabed, her hull intact, as if resting quietly. But even with the wreck identified, the cause of her loss remained uncertain. Some suggested cargo shift destabilized her, others argued structural weakness. Without definitive evidence, the mystery persisted. The Blythe Star's story is remembered in Tasmania as one of endurance as well as tragedy. The survivors' ordeal at sea left an imprint on Australian maritime safety. Their loss led to reforms in coastal shipping regulations and improvements in emergency beacons, ensuring future crews would not vanish without trace. Yet for the families of those who perished, questions linger. Why did the Blythe Star go down on such a routine voyage? And why did it take nearly 30 years to find her resting place? The wreck now lies silent on the ocean floor, a reminder that even small ships can carry large mysteries. Her story blends tragedy with resilience, a vessel lost, survivors adrift, and answers that remain just beyond reach. Lady Lovibond's curse. Sailors still whisper of the Lady Lovibond, wrecked on Valentine's Day 1748. Legend says she reappears every 50 years, a ghostly schooner gliding through Goodwin Sands. Whether shipwreck lore or something more, sightings persist. The Lady Lovibond was said to be a 3-masted schooner, newly launched and celebrated for her elegance. On the 13th of February 1748, she sailed from London on a voyage to Portugal. Her captain, Simon Reed, had just married, and in open defiance of superstition, he brought his new bride aboard. Among sailors, the belief that a woman aboard brought misfortune was deeply entrenched. Reed dismissed it as nonsense, filling the decks with flowers, music, and celebration. But the joyous voyage was destined for tragedy. According to the legend, the ship's first mate harbored jealousy. He too loved Reed's bride, and in a fit of rage and betrayal, he seized the wheel as night fell. With deliberate force, he steered the schooner directly into the Goodwin Sands, a notorious stretch of shoals off Kent, where countless vessels had been lost. The Lady Lovibond smashed upon the sands, her hull breaking apart in the surf. All on board perished, yet the story does not end with the wreck. Exactly 50 years later, on the 13th of February 1798, sailors reported a ghostly schooner under full sail, her rigging bright under moonlight. She appeared real, with men on deck and music drifting faintly. But when rescue vessels drew near, she vanished. Again in 1848, reports came. Witnesses swore they saw a glowing ship sweep across the shoals. A century later, in 1948, locals and coastguards claimed another sighting. Each time, the same date. Each time, the same vanishing. Skeptics argue the tale is folklore, noting no registry confirms the Lady Lovibond. Some claim the story was first printed in the 19th century as entertainment, then spread as fact. The Goodwin Sands themselves are infamous, a graveyard that has swallowed hundreds of vessels. To skeptics, the phantom schooner is a way to personify the shoal's menace. Believers point to the regularity of sightings. Why February 13th? Why a schooner so consistently described? For them, the phantom's return every 50 years is proof of a curse. A jealous crime, a doomed voyage, and a ship condemned to repeat its final moments forever. Today, the Goodwin Sands still lie treacherous, shifting beneath tides, erasing wrecks and rewriting coastlines. Modern sailors passing the sands often mark the date, glancing across the horizon on Valentine's night. Some claim to see nothing. Others insist they glimpse sails gleaming briefly before fading into mist. Whether invention or echo, the Lady Lovibond remains one of Britain's most enduring ghost ship tales. Her curse endures because it is built on themes as old as seafaring itself: jealousy, love, superstition, and betrayal. A captain who defied tradition, a mate who broke trust, and a vessel claimed by the sea. In the end, the truth matters less than the telling. The Lady Lovibond sails still, not in timber but in memory, a schooner wrecked on Love's Day, cursed to haunt the shoals, bound forever to the restless tides. And perhaps 50 years from now, someone will once again look across the Goodwin Sands and see her sails gliding silently through the night. The USS Scorpion submarine. In 1968, the nuclear submarine USS Scorpion vanished in the Atlantic with 99 men aboard. Found months later on the seabed, her wreckage showed no clear cause, leading to speculation of torpedo malfunction, Soviet attack, or mechanical failure. The Scorpion was a skipjack-class submarine, sleek and nuclear-powered, capable of travelling fast and diving deep. Commissioned in 1960, she carried torpedoes, sonar, and advanced systems meant to outpace Soviet subs during the Cold War. She was formidable, yet not immune to flaws. Reports had noted electrical problems, leaking seals and mechanical wear. Still, she sailed. On the 20th of May 1968, while returning to Norfolk, Virginia, the Scorpion sent a routine radio message. The captain reported no trouble. That was the last the world heard. 6 days later, she failed to check in. The Navy declared her overdue. Families waited in anguish as search operations began. The loss was not isolated. In 1968, 4 submarines, American, Soviet, Israeli, and French, all vanished. The Cold War ocean was becoming a graveyard. Speculation immediately erupted. Had the Scorpion fallen to Soviet action? Was there a secret battle hidden beneath the waves? Or was her end a mechanical failure long waiting to strike? The Navy mobilized an immense search effort. Hydrophones picked up acoustic events consistent with an implosion. Using triangulation, they narrowed the location to near the Azores. Months later, in October 1968, the wreck was found. She lay at a depth of nearly 10,000 feet, her hull torn open, debris scattered. The site confirmed disaster but gave little clarity. Several theories emerged. One pointed to a hot-run torpedo. If a torpedo armed itself in the tube, the crew may have tried to eject it, only for it to circle back and detonate. Another argued catastrophic mechanical failure, leaks, flooding, and pressure overwhelming her hull. Soviet involvement remained a shadow, whispered but never proved. Investigations concluded that mechanical failure was most probable, but nothing definitive was released. Families were left with memorials but no answers. 99 men rest entombed in the wreck, their deaths marked by silence. The site is considered both a war grave and a nuclear hazard. Expeditions have photographed her, twisted and broken, but the cause is still debated. The Cold War seas were secretive. Truth was often buried as deeply as the wrecks themselves. The Scorpion's fate remains one of the enduring naval mysteries. Did human error, flawed design, or enemy action take her? In the absence of certainty, the ocean holds the answer. And there, nearly 2 miles below, she lies still, her secrets unspoken, her silence unbroken. MV Limerick and the vanished crew. In 1943, the MV Limerick was torpedoed off Australia. Survivors reached lifeboats, but one was never seen again. In wartime seas, its absence was written off as inevitable, yet no trace was ever confirmed. The Limerick was an 8,000-ton freighter, Irish-flagged, carrying cargo along Australia's east coast during the Second World War. On the 26th of April 1943, she sailed off Cape Byron with a crew of 72. Japanese submarines prowled those waters, and the danger was real. That evening, a torpedo struck her starboard side. The explosion ripped through her hull. The ship listed heavily, sinking quickly. The captain ordered abandon ship. Lifeboats were lowered in haste. Flames licked the sky as the vessel slipped beneath the waves. Rescue operations later recovered most of the survivors, but one lifeboat, carrying around a dozen men, vanished entirely. For days, patrol craft searched the waters. Aircraft scouted. nothing was ever found. In wartime, such losses were frequent. The missing men were presumed dead, their absence recorded as another footnote in the long toll of war, yet the mystery gnawed. Survivors in other boats swore the missing craft had launched successfully. It should have been seaworthy. Why then did it vanish so completely? Storms could overturn boats. Currents could carry them far. Japanese submarines might have captured or destroyed them, but none of these left evidence. Decades later, divers discovered the wreck of the Limerick. She rests upright off Ballina, her hull torn open by the torpedo strike, her steel frame now a reef for marine life. But the missing lifeboat was not with her, nor any clue of its fate. The vanished crew remain part of the unanswered story. Were they swallowed by the sea within hours? Did they drift unseen into the Pacific, carried hopelessly away? Or was their end sudden, violent, erased by forces no one witnessed? The war ended, but families of the missing never had closure. Names were etched on memorials, but bodies were never returned. The lifeboat's absence left a silence larger than wreckage. Today, divers descend to the Limerick's resting place, laying wreaths and paying respects. Her hull is there, her story partly recovered, but the men in the lost boat are elsewhere in the deep, in the currents, in history's shadows. The MV Limerick reminds us that even when the cause of a sinking is known, the sea keeps its mysteries. Ships can be found, wrecks can be charted. But people and their final journeys often vanish without trace. And sometimes that silence is the hardest mystery to endure. The SS Baichimo, the Arctic ghost ship. Abandoned in 1931 after being trapped in ice, the Baichimo refused to sink. For nearly 40 years she was spotted drifting Arctic waters, unmanned, unstoppable, a ghost ship defying time. The Baichimo began life in 1914, built in Sweden and launched as the Ångermanälven. She was later acquired by the Hudson's Bay Company, renamed, and used to transport furs, supplies and trade goods to and from remote Arctic settlements. At 1,300 tons and just over 230 feet in length, she was not enormous. But she was sturdy, built for long hauls across northern seas. Her steel hull was designed to resist ice pressure, though not indefinitely. For years she shuttled through Canada's northern coastlines, delivering goods to traders and Inuit communities in areas too remote for other ships. In October 1931, the Baichimo was caught in early pack ice off the coast of Alaska near Barrow. As temperatures dropped and ice thickened, she became locked fast. Her crew endured weeks of bitter cold, waiting for a thaw, but the ice refused to release its grip. At last, fearing for their survival, the Hudson's Bay Company evacuated most of the men by aircraft, a rare feat for the time, leaving a skeleton crew to guard the vessel. Not long after, a violent storm swept the region. When the skies cleared, the crew discovered the ship was gone. They assumed she had sunk, crushed beneath shifting floes. Yet only days later, Inuit hunters reported seeing her adrift, far from where she had been trapped. A search confirmed the incredible truth. The Baichimo had broken free. Still afloat, scarred but alive, deemed too damaged to recover, she was abandoned. But the story did not end there. Over the years that followed, the Baichimo became a legend of the Arctic. Hunters, trappers, and other ships reported sightings of the ghostly freighter, drifting silently through fog and ice. Sometimes she appeared grounded near the shore, only to vanish again. Other times, she was seen far out at sea, moving with the currents, her decks empty. In 1932, she was boarded by a group of Inupiat hunters who sheltered briefly inside before moving on. In later decades, explorers attempted to salvage her, but ice or weather always drove them away. Each encounter ended with the ship continuing her lonely drift, resisting both capture and destruction. Throughout the 1,930 seconds and 1,940 seconds, reports kept coming. In 1939, she was sighted near Point Barrow. In 1962, she was seen again, remarkably intact despite more than 3 decades abandoned. The last confirmed sighting came in 1969, 38 years after her crew had left her. She was frozen into pack ice once more, drifting slowly off the Alaskan coast. After that, she vanished. How could a steel freighter survive nearly 4 decades without crew? The Arctic provided one answer. In freezing seas, corrosion slowed. With no engines running, no fires burning, the ship suffered less stress. Her cargo holds, largely empty when abandoned, made her unusually buoyant. Year after year, she endured storms, ice pressure, and countless collisions, yet somehow remained afloat. Still, the Beichimo's endurance became more than engineering. She became a symbol, the ghost ship of the Arctic, wandering without master, slipping in and out of human sight. Inuit hunters wove her into stories, mariners passed down her legend. For the Hudson's Bay Company, she was a reminder of commerce interrupted, a ship that refused to end when written off. Today, her fate is unknown. Some believe she finally sank beneath the ice, lying now on the seabed, hidden in silence. Others imagine her still adrift, rusting, moving slowly along northern currents, perhaps even locked within glaciers that conceal her steel bones. The Beichimo's story endures because it resists closure. She should have perished in 1931, yet she survived for decades beyond reason. A ship without crew, without port, without end. In the vastness of the Arctic, she reminds us that the sea does not always surrender its mysteries, and sometimes it lets them wander forever. The vanishing of the Teignmouth Electron. In 1969, Donald Crowhurst's yacht was found drifting, logbook filled with fabricated positions. The solo sailor attempting to circumnavigate the globe had disappeared, perhaps overboard, perhaps into madness. The story began with a race. In 1968, the Sunday Times Golden Globe Race was announced, the first non-stop, single-handed sailing circumnavigation of the world. It promised fame and fortune to whoever completed it, and for Britain, it was a matter of national pride. Among seasoned sailors, the challenge was daunting but achievable. For Donald Crowhurst, an amateur yachtsman and struggling businessman, it was a chance to change his fortune. Crowhurst was charismatic but under pressure. He had secured sponsorship on the promise of completing the voyage, with his business and family's security tied to success. His vessel, the Teignmouth Electron, was a trimaran lightweight, experimental, and untested for such a journey. Engineers doubted her durability in the Southern Ocean, but Crowhurst pressed ahead. He departed England in October 1968, one of 9 competitors. Early radio reports painted a picture of progress, though mechanical issues plagued him almost immediately. His boat leaked, electronics malfunctioned, repairs consumed precious time. As weeks turned into months, the challenges grew. Alone at sea, with failing equipment and the vast Atlantic pressing on every side, the dream of circumnavigation began to collapse. In desperation, Crowhurst made a fateful choice. He began falsifying his logs. Instead of venturing deep into the Southern Ocean, he lingered in the South Atlantic, sending reports that placed him thousands of miles ahead of his true position. His plan seemed clear. Wait, then rejoin the other competitors on the final leg, appearing to have completed the circumnavigation. If executed perfectly, he could return a hero, but deception carries its own weight. The Teignmouth Electron's logbooks, later recovered, reveal a growing descent into confusion and despair. By early 1969, Crowhurst's entries shifted from navigational records to philosophical ruminations, mixing mathematics, metaphysics, and fragmented thoughts. Pages contained ramblings about cosmic forces, truth, and reality. The boundary between strategy and breakdown blurred. By June 1969, the race was nearly complete. Competitor Robin Knox-Johnston had already returned to England as the only sailor to finish the full circumnavigation. Another competitor, Bernard Moitessier, had abandoned the race to continue sailing endlessly. Crowhurst, by contrast, was still adrift in deception. When it became clear his falsified logbooks would not withstand scrutiny, the pressure may have been unbearable. On the 10th of July 1969, the Teignmouth Electron was found adrift in the Atlantic, 1,800 miles west of England. Inside, investigators found 2 logbooks, one with navigational fabrications, the other filled with erratic writings. There was no sign of Crowhurst. The most accepted theory is that he deliberately stepped overboard, overwhelmed by the weight of exposure and despair. Others believe he may have fallen accidentally during repairs, fatigue taking its toll. A few argue he staged his disappearance, though with no evidence of survival, such claims remain speculative. What is certain is that Crowhurst never returned. His family received only his boat and his words, fragments of a mind unravelling under isolation and pressure. The Teignmouth Electron was salvaged and later abandoned in the Caribbean, where her wreck still sits today, bleached by sun and time, a relic of both ambition and tragedy. The vanishing of Donald Crowhurst endures not just as a maritime mystery, but as a profoundly human one. His journey reflects courage, deceit, desperation, and the fragility of the mind when set against the endless sea. Was he a dreamer undone by ambition? A fraud consumed by guilt? Or simply a sailor who slipped quietly into the water, leaving only questions behind? The ocean keeps his secret. The Teignmouth Electron, like the man who sailed her, remains a ghost of the race that changed sailing history, a reminder that sometimes the greatest mysteries are not in the sea, but in the human heart. S. Valencia's Phantom Wreck. When the Valencia struck a reef in 1906, horrific scenes unfolded as lifeboats capsized. Decades later, one lifeboat was found eerily intact, floating as though untouched by time. The S. Valencia was a passenger steamer built in 1882, designed for coastal trade and voyages along North America's western seaboard. She was not luxurious by the standards of her day, but she was sturdy, with a capacity for nearly 200 passengers and crew. By January 1906, she was on a routine run from San Francisco to Seattle, carrying around 108 passengers and 65 crew. The trip was expected to be uneventful. Instead, it became one of the Pacific Northwest's most haunting maritime disasters. On the night of the 22nd of January 1906, thick fog enveloped the coast of Vancouver Island. Heavy seas and strong winds pushed the Valencia dangerously off course. Navigational errors compounded the danger, and by late evening she struck a reef near Pachena Point. The impact tore her hull. Water rushed in. In minutes, chaos erupted on deck. Rescue efforts were frantic but disorganized. Lifeboats were lowered too quickly, many smashing against the hull or overturning in the surf. Survivors described harrowing scenes: mothers holding children, sailors praying, lifeboats flipping in white water. A few managed to scramble onto nearby rocks, but most were swept away. By the time the storm eased, more than 130 lives had been lost. News of the disaster shocked the region. Headlines described bodies washing ashore, wreckage scattered along the coast. The Canadian government ordered inquiries, which concluded that poor navigation and inadequate safety procedures had doomed the vessel. Yet the story of the Valencia did not end with her sinking. Within weeks, strange reports began to circulate. Locals claimed to see a phantom ship off the reefs of Vancouver Island, a steamer with desperate figures clinging to her masts. Mariners swore they heard cries carried across the water on foggy nights. The wreck site gained a reputation as haunted, a place where the dead still called out. But the most extraordinary discovery came decades later. In 1933, nearly 27 years after the disaster, a lifeboat from the Valencia was found adrift near Berkeley Sound. What startled observers was its condition. Despite being exposed to sea, wind and time, the boat appeared astonishingly preserved, with paint still visible and structure intact. It looked, some said, as though it had just been lowered from the steamer's davits. How a wooden lifeboat could survive decades in such a state baffled experts. The find reignited the legend of the Valencia. Was it possible that other boats still drifted, hidden in coves or trapped in sea caves? Or was this one boat's preservation itself part of the mystery, a relic carrying the memory of that terrible night? The wreck of the Valencia eventually sank beneath the waves, becoming part of the rugged seabed near Vancouver Island's treacherous coastline. Today, divers and historians still recount her story. The area around Pachina Point remains feared by sailors, notorious for shifting weather, sharp reefs, and countless wrecks. Yet the Valencia is remembered not only for her loss of life, but for the legends that followed. For decades after the disaster, locals claimed sightings of a ghostly steamer in the mist. Some swore they saw faces at her rails, hands reaching in silent pleas. Others spoke of voices echoing across the fog, faint, mournful, impossible to trace. The Pacific has claimed many ships, but few stories linger as powerfully as the Valencia's. Her disaster was real, her lifeboat tangible, but the line between fact and legend blurred quickly. A wreck became a ghost story, a tragedy became a haunting, and the lifeboat, discovered decades later, remains the most unsettling artifact. A reminder that some ships never truly leave the sea, and some mysteries never fade. The ghost submarine UB-65, a German U-boat of World War I, UB-65 was rumoured cursed after accidents killed crew during construction. In 1918, she exploded mysteriously off Ireland. Later reports described her wreck seen intact but with no human remains. The story of UB-65 begins in 1916, when the German Imperial Navy ordered her construction at the Vulcan shipyard in Hamburg. She was a Type UB-3 submarine, nearly 180 feet long, with a displacement of more than 500 tons. Designed for coastal patrols and long-range strikes, she carried 34 men, 4 bow torpedo tubes, 1 stern tube, and a deck gun. On paper, she was lethal, but from the start, sailors whispered that she was ill-fated. During construction, tragedy struck. A steel girder collapsed onto the unfinished hull, killing 2 workers instantly. Weeks later, a launching accident killed a young officer. Then, during sea trials, toxic fumes from her diesel engines nearly asphyxiated several crewmen. By the time she was commissioned in June 1917, she had already claimed lives without ever facing the enemy. Rumours spread quickly among sailors, men already steeped in superstition. They said UB-65 was cursed. Some claimed to see the ghost of the dead officer wandering her decks. Despite the rumours, the U-boat was pressed into service. She patrolled the North Sea and the English Channel, torpedoing Allied shipping. Records credit her with several sinkings, though her successes were few compared to other boats of her class. Crews rotated in and out, each inheriting the whispers of doom that clung to her hull. On the 10th of July 1918, UB-65 was on patrol off the coast of Ireland, near the southern approaches to the English Channel. According to official accounts, she was preparing to attack when a sudden explosion tore through her hull. From nearby American and British vessels, sailors reported seeing the submarine surface briefly, listing before sinking rapidly by the stern. No depth charges had been dropped. No enemy torpedoes were fired. She had simply detonated from within. All 34 men aboard were lost, The US Navy destroyer USSL-2, patrolling nearby, recorded the event. Officers swore they had not attacked the submarine had self-destructed. But why? Theories abounded. Perhaps her torpedoes had malfunctioned. Perhaps her batteries, prone to releasing explosive gases, had ignited. Yet for those who knew her history, the explanation seemed simpler. The curse had claimed its final toll. The mystery deepened after the war. In the 1,920 seconds, divers claimed to have located the wreck of UB-65. They reported her lying intact on the seabed, her hatches sealed, her hull upright. What disturbed them most was what was missing. No human remains were visible inside. In wartime wrecks, bodies are often found, preserved by cold water. In UB-65, the crew seemed to have vanished. The story spread, feeding the legend. Naval records noted her losses. Cause unknown. Newspapers in Britain and Germany retold the tale, adding flourishes of ghostly apparitions and phantom sounds. Some versions claimed her commander had been seen on deck moments before she exploded, though he had already been killed months earlier in an accident. Skeptics argue the reports are exaggerated. The North Atlantic in wartime was rife with rumour. Wrecks are often misidentified, and currents may have swept remains from the submarine. Still, the coincidences, accidents in construction, unexplained explosions, missing bodies make UB-65 one of the most haunting submarine tales of the First World War. Today, the precise resting place of UB-65 remains debated. Some believe her wreck lies near Fastnet Island, though official surveys have yet to confirm her identity. For historians, she is a reminder of the dangers of early submarine warfare, where technical flaws could be as deadly as enemy action. For sailors, she is remembered as the cursed boat, a vessel haunted from the start. Fact or folklore? The legend of UB-65 endures. She was a machine of war, but one that seemed to turn on her own men, swallowing them without witness. And in the silence off Ireland's coast, the sea still keeps her story a submarine without survivors, drifting forever between history and myth. The Truk Lagoon wrecks. In 1944, Operation Hailstone sank dozens of Japanese ships. Today, divers explore them, preserved like time capsules, but among the wrecks, some vessels appear in positions never recorded in battle logs, raising questions about their last maneuvers. Truk Lagoon, part of the Caroline Islands in Micronesia, was once known as the Gibraltar of the Pacific. By the early 1940 seconds, it had become Japan's most fortified naval base outside its home islands. Protected by barrier reefs and surrounded by deep waters, it sheltered carriers, cruisers, destroyers, and a fleet of merchant ships. The anchorage was so vast that Japanese commanders believed it impregnable. But in February 1944, American forces launched Operation Hailstone, a massive carrier-based assault that turned Truk into one of the greatest ship graveyards on Earth. For 2 days, waves of US aircraft struck relentlessly. Planes strafed airfields and supply depots, igniting fuel stores in towering plumes of smoke. Thousands of Japanese sailors and soldiers perished. The lagoon, once a proud fortress, became a watery tomb. In the decades since, the wrecks have become legendary. Divers who descend into Truk Lagoon find ships preserved almost as they were in 1944. Cargo holds still contain jeeps, motorcycles, crates of rifles, even porcelain dishes stacked neatly. In engine rooms, gauges remain intact, frozen in time. Gas masks, sake bottles, uniforms, and personal belongings rest quietly in the silt. Human remains, too, have been discovered, adding solemn weight to the exploration of these underwater relics. Yet the mystery of Truk Lagoon lies not only in the sheer number of wrecks, but in their strange details. Some vessels rest in positions that do not match after-action reports. Ships that were believed to have been sunk at anchor are found far from their documented moorings. Others, supposedly destroyed in open water, appear deep within the lagoon, their hulls lying at angles suggesting desperate last maneuvers. For example, the Fujikawa Maru, one of the lagoon's most famous wrecks, sits upright with its cargo of fighter planes still in place. Battle records suggest she should have been in shallower water, yet her final resting place lies far from expected coordinates. Divers have found wheelhouses, with telegraphs set to full ahead, suggesting captains fought to flee or beach their vessels, decisions not clearly reflected in battle logs. There are also tales from divers of ships that seem to shift subtly over time. The lagoon is calm, but currents sometimes reveal new features. A mast protruding here, a hull fragment there. These discoveries occasionally contradict long-accepted records of which vessel was which, sparking debates among historians and wreck divers alike. Did chaos in the battle cause errors in Allied reports? Or were some Japanese ships attempting last-minute movements that went unnoticed in the smoke and fury of attack? Operation Hailstone was so overwhelming that its precise chronology remains difficult to reconstruct. With hundreds of aircraft attacking simultaneously, reports often conflicted. One pilot might record a ship sinking at a certain location, while another marked it miles away. In the confusion, errors became part of the official record. For modern divers, Truk Lagoon is both awe-inspiring and unsettling. To descend into its clear waters is to swim into 1,944 to pass coral-encrusted guns, torpedo holes punched through steel, and cabins littered with the belongings of men who never returned home. It is also to confront mysteries. Why certain ships lie where they do, why some still contain undisturbed cargo, and why others have yet to be definitively identified. The lagoon is sometimes called the Ghost Fleet, not only because of the men entombed within, but because the wrecks themselves seem to carry unanswered questions. Historians can map the battles. Divers can explore the holds, but the exact details of those final hours remain elusive. Ships sank quickly, records blurred, and the ocean wrote its own history. Truk Lagoon today is a place of beauty, tragedy, and mystery. Coral gardens now cover the steel hulls, life flourishing amid destruction. Yet beneath the colour and silence, the wrecks remain frozen testimony to a battle's chaos. Some lie exactly as described, others in defiance of the official record. And in that discrepancy lies the enduring enigma of Truk Lagoon, a graveyard where the past refuses to fully align with history. The Kamchatka Disappearances. Remote Siberian waters conceal wrecks of Cold War submarines lost under unexplained conditions. Their steel hulls rest silent, their missions still classified. To this day, no complete account has surfaced. The Kamchatka Peninsula juts like a claw into the Pacific Ocean, a remote, volcanic landscape where snow-capped peaks rise above dark, frigid seas. During the Cold War, it was one of the Soviet Union's most heavily guarded military zones. Submarines based here patrolled the Pacific, carrying nuclear weapons and conducting missions cloaked in secrecy. For Moscow, Kamchatka was both a shield and a sword, a launch point for deterrence, and a hiding place for vessels never meant to be tracked. But the waters around Kamchatka earned a reputation even among submariners as dangerous. Treacherous currents, volcanic seabeds, and sudden storms tested both men and machines. It was here, in these depths, that several Soviet submarines were lost under circumstances that remain unclear even today. One of the most infamous cases was the sinking of Kone, 129 inches, March 1968. A diesel-powered ballistic missile submarine, K-129, was believed to be on a secret patrol when she vanished north of Hawaii, in waters linked to Soviet bases in Kamchatka. When she failed to return, the Soviets conducted massive search operations but found nothing. Unbeknownst to them, US surveillance had already tracked the disaster through undersea acoustic sensors. Months later, the wreck was located 16,000 feet down. Officially, Moscow gave no explanation. Unofficial theories range from a catastrophic missile malfunction to a collision with an American submarine. In the 1,970 seconds, the CIA mounted a daring attempt to recover parts of the vessel codenamed Project Azorian. But secrecy still clouds what was actually found. Another tragedy struck in 1983, when K-429, a nuclear-powered submarine, sank during training near Petropavlovsk in Kamchatka's Avacha Bay. Poorly prepared, undermanned, and launched without authorization, she suffered flooding in her ballast tanks and plunged to the seabed in shallow water. Dozens of crew perished, though some managed to escape using emergency breathing equipment. Incredibly, the submarine was later raised, only to sink again during towing. For years, Soviet authorities concealed the scale of the accident, and survivors were silenced. Other incidents remain even more obscure. Reports speak of submarines lost in the 1,970 seconds and 1,980 seconds, whose details were never released. Families received little more than terse telegrams informing them their loved ones had been lost in training accidents. Rumors circulated among naval circles of sudden implosions, reactor leaks, or collisions during tense encounters with US submarines shadowing Soviet patrols. The exact number of subs lost remains uncertain, but the seabed near Kamchatka is believed to hold multiple wrecks. Western intelligence agencies tracked many of these disappearances, but rarely shared details. Hydroacoustic monitoring from the U.S. Sound Surveillance System, SOSUS, captured the sounds of implosions thousands of miles away. Yet these records were kept classified for decades. For the Soviets, secrecy was paramount. Losses were hidden not only from the outside world, but often from their own citizens. Entire crews vanished into silence, their graves unmarked except by the ocean. Today, divers and researchers have occasionally identified submarine wrecks in the far Pacific, but access to Kamchatka remains restricted. Radiation concerns linger, as some of the lost vessels carried nuclear reactors and warheads. Even when wrecks are confirmed, details of their missions and the true causes of their sinking remain locked away in military archives. For families of the lost, the mystery is painful. Without wreckage publicly acknowledged, without bodies returned, closure never came. For historians, the Kamchatka disappearances illustrate both the peril of submarine service and the secrecy of the Cold War, when information itself was treated as a weapon. Somewhere in the cold depths of Kamchatka, steel hulls lie quietly. They were built for power, for secrecy, for war. Now they rest as monuments of silence. Whether their stories will ever be fully told is uncertain. The sea holds their wrecks. The state holds their records. Between the two, the truth remains, hidden a reminder that not all mysteries of the Cold War lie in politics, but in the deep ocean, where men once sailed and never returned. The Palmyra Atoll mystery. Yachts have vanished near Palmyra's reefs, a place feared by sailors for centuries. Most chilling was a 1,974 double murder where the bodies were never recovered. The atoll keeps its secrets beneath turquoise waters. Palmyra Atoll lies in the central Pacific Ocean, about 1,000 miles south of Hawaii. From the air, it appears idyllic, a scattering of coral islets encircling a turquoise lagoon. But for sailors, its reputation has long been darker. Treacherous reefs, unpredictable storms, and eerie isolation make Palmyra one of the Pacific's most feared anchorages. Legends tell of ghostly lights flickering across the lagoon, ships breaking apart on reefs, and unlucky crews who vanished without explanation. Over time, Palmyra became less a paradise than a place of whispered curses. In 1974, the atoll gained worldwide attention. That summer, a wealthy sailing couple, Malcolm Mac Graham and his wife Eleanor Muff Graham, set out from California aboard their yacht, Sea Wind. They planned to spend months cruising the South Pacific. Palmyra, remote and uninhabited except for a few caretakers, seemed like a perfect stop, but the Sea Wind's arrival coincided with another yacht, the Iola, crewed by Buck Walker and his girlfriend, Stephanie Stearns. Unlike the Grahams, Walker and Stearns were fugitives, wanted for drug offences. The isolated atoll became the setting for a chilling confrontation. According to later testimony, tensions between the couples quickly escalated. Palmyra offered no easy escape, reefs blocked entry, radios were unreliable, and help was 1,000 miles away. When the Grahams vanished in August, Walker and Stearns returned to Hawaii aboard the Sea Wind, claiming the couple had given them the yacht in exchange for supplies. Authorities were suspicious. Months later, the vessel was found cleaned of blood but bearing traces of hasty repainting. Still, without bodies, prosecutors lacked evidence. The mystery deepened 6 years later. In 1981, a visitor to Palmyra discovered human bones on a beach, partly buried in sand and coral. They were identified as Eleanor Graham's remains. Forensic analysis suggested violent death. No trace of Malcolm was ever found. With this discovery, Walker was tried for murder, convicted, and sentenced to life in prison. Stephanie Stearns was acquitted, yet even with a conviction, the fate of the Grahams remains unresolved. Their final hours on the atoll hidden in silence. The case is chilling, but it is not the only Palmyra mystery. Sailors before and since have reported strange misfortunes. Yachts vanish without distress calls, wreckage washes ashore, but crews are never seen again. The atoll's remoteness, combined with powerful currents and sharp reefs, makes accidents plausible. Yet the frequency and eeriness of the stories give Palmyra its haunted reputation. During World War II, the US Navy briefly occupied Palmyra, using it as an air base. Soldiers stationed there later spoke of unease, describing the atoll as unnatural, with a silence broken only by the crash of waves and cries of seabirds. Several accidents occurred during the occupation, including fatal drownings and aircraft crashes on its short, treacherous runway. When the war ended, Palmyra was abandoned once more, left to the sea, the birds, and the legends. Today, Palmyra is managed as a nature reserve, largely uninhabited except for scientists and caretakers. Its lagoons are home to sharks, rays, and vast schools of fish. Yet beneath the beauty, its darker stories endure. Divers speak of wrecks lying on reefs like skeletons, some so encrusted with coral they appear prehistoric. Locals in Hawaii still warn sailors to steer clear, saying Palmyra does not let go once it takes hold. The murder of the Grahams remains the atoll's most notorious tale, but it is part of a longer pattern. Ships still founder there, sailors still vanish. Whether through treachery, mischance, or something stranger, Palmyra keeps its silence. Its turquoise waters conceal both life and death, both reef and grave, and when the tide surges over its shifting sands, the atoll seems less like paradise and more like a reminder. Some places are beautiful, but beauty can hide secrets. The sea will never willingly surrender. The Carrollton Ghost Steamer. Reports from the 19th century describe a phantom riverboat appearing on fog-shrouded nights along the Mississippi. Each sighting coincided with real shipwrecks days later. No physical wreck was ever tied to it. The Mississippi River in the 1800s was America's great highway, carrying steamboats filled with cotton, timber, passengers, and goods. Towns along its banks lived by the rhythm of paddle wheels and whistles echoing through the night. Shifting channels, submerged snags, and sudden fog banks made the river treacherous. Fires, boiler explosions, and collisions were tragically common. In this setting, legends took root none more haunting than that of the Carrollton ghost steamer. Carrollton, now a neighborhood of New Orleans, was once an independent riverside town. Steamboats passed its levees daily, their bright lights reflected in the water. It was here that tales first spread of a strange vessel appearing in heavy fog. Witnesses described it as a grand riverboat, fully lit, with figures moving on deck. Its paddle wheel churned silently. Its whistle gave no sound. Then, just as suddenly as it appeared, it would vanish into the mist. Days later, news would arrive upriver or downriver of a genuine disaster, a steamboat wreck, lives lost, and cargo gone to the bottom. By the 1,830 seconds, newspapers were reporting on the phantom. Skeptics dismissed the stories as river folklore, born of weary eyes and fertile imaginations, yet the consistency of the accounts troubled others. Experienced pilots, men who knew every bend and sandbar, swore they saw the ghostly vessel. Some said it shimmered as if made of moonlight. Others claimed its decks were crowded with passengers, eerily silent. The detail most often repeated was the timing. Within days of a sighting, a real steamboat accident would follow. One notorious case occurred in 1833, when rivermen near Carrollton described seeing the phantom steamer glide past without sound. Only 3 days later, the Lioness, a passenger steamboat travelling upriver, exploded after a fire reached her cargo of gunpowder. Dozens were killed. The coincidence sealed the legend in the minds of many. To see the Carrollton ghost steamer was not just to glimpse an apparition, but to receive a grim omen. The stories spread along the river, gaining embellishments as they went. Some insisted the ghost was a doomed vessel, destroyed in an early boiler explosion, cursed to wander the Mississippi forever. Others believed it was not a wreck at all, but a vision, a warning sent to foretell tragedy. Pilots who claimed sightings sometimes refused to take their boats out the next night, fearing the prophecy of disaster. By the late 19th century, as steamboats declined and railroads rose, reports of the phantom dwindled. But the legend never vanished entirely. Writers collected the stories, blending them into the larger folklore of haunted waters and river spirits. The Mississippi itself, unpredictable and often deadly, seemed the perfect stage for such a tale. In a time when lives and fortunes depended on river travel, mysteries of the water carried enormous weight. Modern historians suggest natural explanations. On foggy nights, reflections of lanterns or nearby boats could create illusions. Atmospheric conditions on the wide river may have produced mirages. Memory, rumour, and tragedy did the rest, weaving scattered sightings into a coherent legend. Still, even with rational explanations, the timing of the ghost's appearances remains the most unsettling detail. Why did so many accounts coincide with real disasters? Was it coincidence, or did river pilots, skilled in reading signs, sense subtle warnings they could not consciously explain? Today, Carrollton is part of bustling New Orleans, its riverfront lined with levees, parks, and tracks for streetcars. Steamboats no longer dominate the Mississippi, but echoes of their whistles linger in the city's memory. For those who know the old stories, the Carrollton ghost steamer is more than a piece of folklore. It is a reminder of the river's dual nature, lifeline and grave, giver and taker. No wreck was ever identified as the ghostly vessel. No records tie it to a specific boat lost in the 19th century. Instead, it remains a phantom of history, a symbol of disaster foretold and lives swept away. In the rolling fog of the Mississippi nights, some still say a silent paddle wheel churns, warning of tragedies yet to come. The Thomas Hume and schooner pair. In 1891, the schooner Thomas Hume vanished from Lake Michigan with 6 crew. Its partnership survived the storm, but no wreckage, no wood, no bodies were ever seen. The Thomas Hume was a sturdy 3-masted schooner owned by lumber baron Charles Hackley of Muskegon, Michigan. Built in 1870, she measured 132 feet long and weighed 214 tons. For 2 decades, she carried timber across the Great Lakes, part of a vast industry that fueled the growth of Midwest cities. Though not glamorous, she was reliable, one of dozens of wooden schooners that plied Lake Michigan's waters daily. On the 21st of May 1891, the Thomas Hume set out from Chicago alongside her partner vessel, the Rouse Simmons, both bound northward to Muskegon. They were light that day, sailing without heavy cargo, as the plan was to load lumber at the company's mills upon arrival. The weather seemed mild enough when they departed, though Lake Michigan is infamous for changing moods. By evening, winds strengthened, and squalls swept across the lake. The 2 schooners pressed on, sails straining in the gusts. By the next morning, only the Rouse Simmons reached Muskegon. The Thomas Hume had vanished. No distress signals were reported. No wreckage washed ashore. Despite immediate searches, not a single trace of her 6-man crew was ever found. The disappearance stunned Muskegon's shipping community. Schooners could sink, yes, but almost always debris would drift to shore, timbers, spars, or even bodies carried by currents. In this case, nothing emerged. Newspapers quickly seized on the mystery, speculating about sudden squalls, hidden shoals, or even collisions with larger steamships. Theories abounded, but evidence was absent. The loss of the Thomas Hume fed into a growing lore of Great Lakes vanishings. The lake, though inland, is vast, spanning more than 300 miles north to south. Its storms can rival the fury of ocean tempests, with waves reaching 20 feet or more. Still, seasoned sailors found it hard to believe that an entire schooner could disappear so completely. Even wrecks that sank in deep water usually gave up fragments. The silence of the Thomas Hume's fate lent her story an eerie quality. For over a century, the ship remained one of Lake Michigan's most enduring mysteries. In 2006, however, divers searching the southern end of the lake stumbled upon a remarkably well-preserved wreck. Resting upright at a depth of about 150 feet, the vessel matched the dimensions and features of the Thomas Hume. Her hull was intact, her masts broken but recognizable. Even after more than 100 years, her wooden timbers remained in place, sealed by cold, fresh water. The discovery answered one question, where the Thomas Hume lay, but raised others. How had she gone down so quickly? Examination showed no sign of collision or fire. Some experts suggested the schooner may have been overwhelmed by a sudden squall, her empty hold making her unstable in heavy seas. With no cargo weighing her down, a sharp gust could have capsized her in moments. Her crew, caught without warning, may have had no chance to launch lifeboats or signal distress. Still, the absence of wreckage washing ashore remains puzzling. It was as though the lake had swallowed her whole and kept her hidden until divers found her more than a century later. For the families of the 6 men, the disappearance left a painful silence. Without bodies, they could only imagine the crew's final minutes: a sudden squall, a rush of icy water, darkness closing in. For Muskegon's shipping community, it was a reminder that even familiar waters could hold lethal secrets. Today, the wreck of the Thomas Hume is protected as an archaeological site, a ghost of the lumber era preserved beneath Lake Michigan's surface. She lies in silence, her decks empty, her mystery partly solved but never fully explained, because in the end, no one knows why she sank so swiftly, or why the lake kept her secret for so long. The Thomas Hume remains both found and lost, a schooner erased without a trace, then returned by time, her story lingering in the cold depths of the Great Lakes. The Seabird Mystery. In 1750, the merchant ship Seabird was found aground in Rhode Island, cargo intact, cabins neat, but crew gone. The logbook ended mid-sentence, and no trace of the sailors ever surfaced. The Seabird was a brigantine engaged in the colonial trade between the Caribbean and New England. On the 15th of August, 1750, locals near Newport noticed her drifting steadily into Narragansett Bay. At first, she seemed under command. Sails were trimmed, her course steady. But when she ran aground gently near Easton's beach, the absence of movement on deck raised alarm. A party rowed out to board. What they discovered became one of America's earliest sea mysteries. The vessel was in perfect order. Cargo of molasses, rum, and indigo was intact. Cabins were neat, trunks arranged, personal belongings untouched. The galley fire still glowed faintly, with food half prepared, suggesting interruption in the middle of routine. Even the ship's dog remained aboard, barking nervously at the strangers who climbed on deck. The logbook gave one clue, though it deepened the mystery. The last entry broke off mid-sentence, as if the writer had been interrupted and never returned. There was no mention of storm, mutiny, or danger. It was as though the men had simply vanished into thin air. Speculation erupted. Some argued pirates had seized the crew but inexplicably spared the valuable cargo. Others believed the men abandoned ship in panic, fearing sudden danger. But why would sailors with years of experience flee a seaworthy vessel in calm weather? Theories turned darker. Mutiny, ending in violence, supernatural intervention, or the hand of the sea itself. What is remarkable is the lack of aftermath. Normally, missing crewmen wash ashore, or small boats are discovered. Here, no bodies, no wreckage, no lifeboat appeared. The Seabird herself was salvaged, repaired, and put back into service, as though nothing had happened. Her mystery, however, became a story retold across generations. Even today, historians puzzle over her fate. With few surviving records, separating fact from folklore is difficult, but the essence remains unchanged. A ship intact, her cargo undisturbed, her crew vanished forever. The Seabird endures as a ghost ship of early America, her log frozen mid-sentence, her silence carried forward by the tides of history. SS Marine Sulphur Queen. In 1963, the Marine Sulphur Queen vanished with 39 men off Florida. A tanker of molten sulphur, it left only a few life jackets drifting in currents. Originally launched in 1944 as a T2 oil tanker, the ship was converted to carry molten sulphur, transported in insulated tanks at over 275 degrees Fahrenheit. At 524 feet long, she hauled more than 15,000 tons of dangerous cargo. Despite concerns over her stability after conversion, she remained in service. On the 2nd of February 1963, she left Beaumont, Texas, bound for Norfolk, Virginia. The weather was mild, and radio reports on February 3 indicated normal progress in the Straits of Florida. Hours later, she was gone. When she failed to arrive, the Coast Guard launched extensive searches. Planes and ships combed thousands of square miles. They found only life jackets, seat cushions, and small bits of debris, none conclusive. No bodies surfaced, no wreckage large enough to identify. Theories multiplied. One pointed to her conversion. Engineers warned the redesign weakened her hull and exposed her to stresses she was not built to endure. Carrying superheated sulfur may have caused catastrophic structural failure, splitting her suddenly. Others argued that vapors ignited, producing an explosion so fast the crew had no time to signal. Yet no nearby vessel reported such a blast. Mystery deepened because disappearances of this scale are rare in modern shipping. Even sudden sinkings leave lifeboats or wreckage. The Marine Sulphur Queen left virtually nothing, because the loss occurred in waters near the Bermuda Triangle. Speculation turned to legend. Writers suggested she joined other vanished ships in a region infamous for disappearances. Scientists remained skeptical, pointing to design flaws and hazardous cargo. In 1964, the Coast Guard closed the case. Cause unknown. Families received no remains, no closure. The Marine Sulphur Queen remains a ghost of the Gulf, her fate sealed in silence. the vanished tanker SS Poet. In 1980, the SS Poet sailed from Philadelphia toward Egypt with a cargo of grain. It disappeared in the Atlantic. No distress call, no wreckage, only silence. The Poet began as a World War II naval cargo ship before conversion for merchant service. At 522 feet, she carried bulk cargoes across oceans. On the 24th of October 1980, she departed Philadelphia with 13,500 tons of corn bound for Port Said, Egypt. Aboard were 34 men. Her final radio call that evening placed her 230 miles east of Delaware. Conditions were rough, 30-knot winds, 15-foot seas, but routine for seasoned sailors. The captain reported all well. By morning, she was gone. Rescue efforts were immediate. Coast Guard cutters, aircraft, and Navy ships scoured more than 70,000 square miles. No lifeboats, no survivors, no oil slick. Investigators examined possibilities. Her age was a factor. Built in 1944, she had seen decades of service. Structural fatigue may have caused her hull to fail in heavy seas. Others pointed to cargo shift. Bulk grain, if not properly balanced, can shift suddenly, causing a vessel to list fatally. Yet both explanations left unanswered. Why no wreckage floated free, speculation extended to more mysterious causes. Some linked her disappearance to the law of the Bermuda Triangle, though her route lay slightly north. For families of the crew, official answers were thin comfort. The Coast Guard concluded structural failure was most likely, but left the case unresolved. The SS Poet remains one of the late 20th century's great maritime vanishings. The mysterious death ship, Ruun Maru. A Japanese fishing vessel lost in the 2011 tsunami, drifted for over a year across the Pacific. When finally intercepted, it was eerily intact, crewless, silent, a ghostly reminder of catastrophe. The Ruun Maru was a 164-foot Japanese fishing boat, built decades earlier and based in Hokkaido. By 2011, she was already retired, moored in the port of Hachinohe, awaiting scrapping. On March 11, however, one of the most devastating earthquakes in modern history struck Japan. The Great East Japan Earthquake, magnitude 9, unleashed a tsunami that tore through coastal towns and swept thousands of vessels out to sea. Among them was the Ruun Maru. Unlike other ships, she was unmanned. No crew scrambled aboard as the wave lifted her from the harbour and pushed her into the open Pacific. For weeks, the vessel was assumed destroyed, another casualty of the disaster that claimed nearly 20,000 lives. Yet the ocean had other plans. Instead of sinking, the Ruun Maru drifted eastward, carried by currents across the vast North Pacific. Months passed. In 2012, over a year after the tsunami, reports began to surface of a ghostly ship moving silently across open water. Satellites confirmed it. The Ruun Maru had survived her journey intact. Her hull was weathered, her deck stripped bare by storms, but she remained afloat, slowly making her way toward North America. For the Canadian Coast Guard, her presence became both a curiosity and a concern. Drifting without crew, she posed a hazard to navigation, especially for large vessels transiting the busy shipping lanes off British Columbia and Alaska. Yet when reconnaissance planes flew over her, what they saw carried an unsettling air. The ship was intact, listing slightly but stable, as though she waited for sailors who would never return. Rust streaked her sides, but her silhouette was unmistakable, a working vessel adrift, caught between life and death. In March 2012, the US Coast Guard intercepted her about 170 miles off the coast of Alaska. Boarding was considered too dangerous, as the vessel was unstable and lacked power. Instead, they monitored her movements. Fishermen who saw her described an eerie quiet. No sound of engines, no lights, no human activity, only the creak of waves against her hull. She had become, in every sense, a ghost ship. The decision was made to sink her. On the 5th of April 2012, the Coast Guard cutter Anacapa fired 25mm rounds into her hull. Flames rose briefly from within as she began to list, and after several hours she slipped beneath the waves. There was no ceremony, no survivors, no bodies, only steel sinking into the deep Pacific. Yet the Ryu and Maru's story endures, not because of how it ended, but because of what it symbolized. She had been carried across an ocean by currents alone, surviving gales and storms without a soul aboard. She became a drifting relic of a national tragedy, an object of fascination for sailors who spotted her on the horizon. Some felt she was a reminder of nature's force, others a tribute to the lives swept away in the tsunami. Her survival for over a year without human presence speaks to the resilience of the sea's relics, but also to the strangeness of disaster. How many other vessels were lost on the 11th of March 2011? Never to be seen again. Why did this one endure long enough to be sighted thousands of miles away? The Pacific Ocean holds countless wrecks, many hidden, some drifting, until finally claimed. The Ryuun Maru was unusual only because she reappeared, intact and undeniable, an echo of tragedy given form. Though sunk deliberately, her ghost remains in memory, a reminder that even in the modern age, the sea can carry its mysteries across continents and years. The Octavius frozen crew. Legend speaks of the Octavius, found in 1775 adrift off Greenland. Its crew, frozen at their posts, appeared locked in ice for over a decade, a tale both maritime record and seafarer folklore. The story of the Octavius is one of the most chilling in maritime lore, hovering between history and myth. According to reports, the British whaling ship Herald, operating off the coast of Greenland in 1775, encountered a derelict vessel drifting slowly with the ice. As whalers approached, they noted her weathered hull and ragged sails, yet she remained eerily intact. Curiosity overcame hesitation, and a boarding party was sent. What they found became one of the most enduring ghost ship stories of the 18th century. The men who climbed aboard were met with silence. Cabins were coated in frost, ropes stiffened by years of exposure. Then, in the captain's quarters, they found something extraordinary. Seated at a desk was the body of a man, pen still in hand, papers frozen beneath him. He was dressed in the garb of a ship's master, suggesting this was the Octavius's captain. All around, the bodies of crew lay in bunks or collapsed near their posts, preserved by the Arctic cold. It appeared as though the ship's life had ended in a single moment, frozen into permanence. Among the papers was a logbook, its final entry dated 1762, 13 years earlier. If true, it meant the Octavius had been locked in Arctic ice for over a decade, drifting until finally released into waters near Greenland. The entry suggested the ship had attempted the fabled Northwest Passage, a dangerous and then unmapped route across the top of North America. The voyage may have succeeded partway before ice sealed their fate. The whalers, unnerved, did not linger. They retrieved only fragments of the log before retreating. The Octavius was left adrift again, swallowed once more by Arctic silence. She was never seen again. Historians debate the truth of this tale. No official records of the Octavius survive beyond anecdotal reports, and the exact name of her captain remains uncertain. Some argue the story was embellished by sailors eager to add mystery to the already perilous lore of the Northwest Passage. Others point out that frozen preservation of crew is entirely plausible in the Arctic, where ice can lock a ship for decades and cold prevents decay. The most compelling element is the logbook's date. If genuine, it would place the Octavius as one of the earliest attempts to cross the Northwest Passage, predating successful navigation by centuries. The voyage's failure, if true, was not through lack of courage but the overwhelming force of polar ice. In that sense, the ship's legend reflects both ambition and tragedy, a human determination meeting the limits of nature. Seafarers in later years told the story often. For them, the Octavius was not only a ghost ship but a warning. To chase forbidden routes could mean eternal entrapment. Sailors whispered that the Octavius still drifted, emerging now and then from ice fog, her frozen crew at their posts, carrying a silent message across centuries. Whether real or embellished, the Octavius endures because it embodies the sea's power to preserve mystery. A ship found intact, a crew seated in death, a voyage begun but never ended. The details blur, yet the image remains, a captain forever at his desk, pen poised above unfinished words, while outside, ice closes in. The Arctic has claimed countless ships, from the Franklin expedition to modern vessels trapped by shifting flows. The Octavius remains the most legendary among them, straddling the line between fact and folklore. Perhaps she was real. Perhaps she was only a tale sailors told to make sense of the unknown. Either way, she is remembered as the ghost ship that froze time itself. The Andrea Doria collision. When the Andrea Doria collided with the Stockholm in 1956, 46 lives were lost, yet hundreds of survivors recalled eerie fog, sudden shifts, and confusion that no navigation chart has ever explained fully. The Andrea Doria was Italy's pride, a 697-foot ocean liner launched in 1951, a floating symbol of post-war renewal. With her sleek design, art-filled interiors, and state-of-the-art safety features, she was considered one of the most modern ships afloat. She carried nearly 1,700 passengers and crew across the Atlantic, offering glamour, speed, and security. On the 17th of July 1956, the liner departed Genoa bound for New York. After days at sea, she approached the American coastline, scheduled to arrive the following morning. The Atlantic that evening was cloaked in heavy fog off Nantucket. Visibility dropped to a few hundred feet, forcing vessels to rely on radar and sound signals. Foghorns boomed across the night, echoing eerily over the water. At the same time, the Swedish liner Stockholm was outbound from New York, beginning her voyage to Gothenburg. Smaller, sturdier, and with a reinforced ice-breaking bow, the Stockholm cut through the fog on an opposite course. Both ships detected each other on radar well before impact, yet their interpretations diverged. On the Andrea Doria, Captain Piero Calamai ordered a turn to port, seeking to pass safely. On the Stockholm, officers steered starboard, attempting the same. In the dense fog, with radar misreadings and human hesitation, their paths converged instead of separating. At 11:10 p.m., the Stockholm's reinforced bow slammed into the starboard side of the Andrea Doria. Steel shrieked, decks shuddered, and cabins collapsed as water poured into the Italian liner. The collision tore a gash 40 feet long and 30 feet deep. Within minutes, the Andrea Doria listed severely to starboard, making half her lifeboats unusable. Passengers, many asleep, were thrown into chaos. Survivors later recalled confusion, foghorns blaring, alarms ringing, corridors tilting. Families stumbled through smoke and water as crew tried to lower boats. Despite the chaos, discipline largely held. Distress calls went out, and nearby ships raced to assist. The French liner Île-de-France arrived first, illuminating the scene with searchlights and lowering lifeboats. One by one, survivors were ferried away from the sinking ship. Helicopters and Coast Guard cutters joined in. By dawn, more than 1,600 people had been rescued. Still, 46 lives were lost in the collision, and the immediate flooding passengers trapped in crushed cabins, crew unable to escape sealed compartments. The Andrea Doria remained afloat for nearly 11 hours, long enough for most survivors to escape. At 10:09 a.m. on July 26, she rolled onto her starboard side and slipped beneath the Atlantic, her hull settling at a depth of 240 feet. Investigations followed, but the causes remained mired in dispute. Some blamed misinterpretation of radar, Others pointed to navigational rules in fog, arguing that each captain made critical but opposite assumptions. Survivors spoke of eerie conditions, dense fog that seemed to thicken at the moment of impact, strange echoes on radar screens, and sudden shifts in visibility. For decades, historians have passed testimonies. Yet no single explanation fully resolves why two modern liners, equipped with radar, collided in open water. The wreck of the Andrea Doria lies today off Nantucket, heavily corroded, a diver's challenge nicknamed the Mount Everest of wreck diving. Her interior is collapsing, but artifacts still emerge china, portholes, even personal belongings, reminders of the night glamour gave way to tragedy. The Andrea Doria's sinking is remembered as both a triumph of rescue and a mystery of error. Nearly everyone survived thanks to swift response, yet the disaster should never have occurred. Why radar failed to prevent collision? Why signals were misunderstood? And why fog seemed almost alive remain questions unanswered. She was Italy's great liner, lost not to storm or fire, but to confusion in the night. And in the silence off Nantucket, the sea still holds her secret how two ships met in fog, and why one never came home. The Yongala's vanishing. In 1911, Australia's SS Yongala disappeared in a cyclone. All 122 aboard were lost, the wreck only rediscovered 50 years later, a coral-encrusted tomb in the deep. The Yongala was launched in 1903, a steel passenger and cargo steamer, measuring 350 feet in length and weighing nearly 3,600 tons. She was among the most modern vessels in Australian waters. Equipped with electric lights and refrigeration, capable of carrying over 700 passengers. By 1911, she was a familiar sight along the Queensland coast, linking towns from Brisbane to Cairns. Her name, drawn from an Aboriginal word meaning broad water, carried a sense of reliability. On the 14th of March 1911, the Yongala departed Mackay bound for Townsville. Aboard were 122 people, passengers, crew and cargo that included racehorses and supplies for northern settlements. The cyclone warning system of the time was rudimentary, relying on telegraphs and flag signals at ports. Unfortunately, the Yongala never received the latest cyclone alert. Once she left Mackay, she steamed directly into the path of one of Queensland's fiercest storms. The cyclone struck with violent winds exceeding 120 kilometers per hour and seas building into towering walls. Other ships in the region turned back or sought shelter, but the Yongala pressed on, unaware of the danger. Witnesses later described enormous waves sweeping the coastline, tearing roofs from houses and uprooting trees. Somewhere off Cape Bowling Green, the Yongala met the full force of the storm. By dawn on March 15, wreckage began washing ashore. Cargo crates, deck planks, and the bodies of horses were found scattered along the beaches near Ayr. Within days, more debris surfaced, grim confirmation of the ship's fate. Yet no survivors were ever located, and the Yongala herself seemed to have vanished completely. The loss devastated Queensland. It was the worst maritime disaster in Australian waters since the wreck of the Dunbar decades earlier. Families mourned without bodies to bury. Newspapers demanded answers. But without wireless radio on board, no distress call had ever been sent. The exact location of her sinking remained unknown. For decades, the Yongala's resting place eluded searchers. Fishermen occasionally reported snags on nets, and divers claimed to glimpse shadows beneath the water, but nothing could be confirmed. The mystery deepened the legend, as stories spread of a ship swallowed whole by the cyclone, her passengers entombed far below. In 1958, nearly 50 years later, the wreck was finally located about 12 nautical miles off Cape Bowling Green, lying in 100 feet of water. Divers who descended reported a haunting sight. The ship lay on her starboard side, remarkably intact, her steel hull preserved by sand and current. Coral had already claimed her decks, and schools of fish darted through gaping hatches. Inside, artifacts remained. Crockery, bottles, even personal belongings. But the bodies of passengers and crew had long since returned to the sea. The discovery provided closure, yet questions lingered. Why had the Yongala pressed forward rather than seeking shelter? Did she suffer a sudden capsize in the storm's eye, or was she overwhelmed gradually by flooding? Today, the wreck of the Yongala is one of the world's premier dive sites. Coral gardens now cloak her steel bones, and giant groupers, turtles and rays circle her decks. Divers speak of the wreck with reverence, aware that it is both a vibrant reef and a grave. Strict protections ensure the site remains untouched, a monument to the 122 who perished. The Yongala's story endures because it is both tragedy and transformation. A ship lost to storm became a living reef. A disaster of silence became a place of beauty. Yet beneath the coral and the life it supports, the mystery of her vanishing remains. A vessel too modern to fail, gone without a word, remembered only by the sea. The HMS Atalanta Mystery. Once the HMS Juno, the training ship vanished in 1880 with 281 men. Sailing from Bermuda, she never arrived in England. Rumours blamed sudden squalls, but no debris was ever confirmed. The Atalanta began her life in 1844 as the HMS Juno, a 26-gun frigate of the Royal Navy. She served for decades, but by the late 19th century, she was considered outdated as a warship. Like many aging vessels, she was repurposed as a training ship for young sailors. Renamed Atalanta, she became a floating classroom, carrying hundreds of naval cadets to sea to learn the skills of seamanship. In January 1880, the Atalanta prepared for her most fateful voyage. She departed Bermuda on the 31st, bound for Portsmouth, England. Aboard were 281 souls, most of them trainees, boys and young men eager to begin naval service. For them, the crossing was not only a lesson in navigation and discipline, but also a rite of passage into adulthood. Officers, many with years of service, commanded the ship. By all accounts, morale was high as the vessel sailed into the Atlantic, but the North Atlantic in winter is unforgiving. February storms often lash the waters with sudden gales, towering waves and freezing spray. On that voyage, the Atalanta encountered precisely such conditions. Reports from other ships describe violent squalls sweeping the region, with winds capable of capsizing even sturdy vessels. It is believed the Atalanta sailed directly into the heart of one of these tempests. The ship was never seen again. She failed to arrive in Portsmouth, and as weeks passed, hope dwindled. Families of the young cadets waited anxiously for news, but only silence returned. The Admiralty launched inquiries and search efforts, but no wreckage, no bodies, no messages in bottles were ever conclusively linked to her. A ship carrying nearly 300 men had vanished without a trace. Speculation filled the void. Some argued she had been overwhelmed by sudden squalls, her sails torn to shreds, her hull battered by seas until she foundered. Others suspected her design played a role. As a converted frigate, she was top-heavy, perhaps unstable when crowded with cadets and gear. Critics suggested the Admiralty had erred in sending her across the Atlantic in winter, effectively placing trainees in unnecessary peril. Whispers of other causes circulated. A few claimed she had collided with an iceberg, though such ice was rare so far south in the Atlantic. Others imagined she had foundered slowly, with survivors drifting on makeshift rafts, their fate unknown. Yet no evidence ever surfaced. The tragedy struck Britain deeply. Newspapers covered the story for weeks, highlighting the youth of those lost boys who had left home for service only to vanish into the Atlantic. Parents demanded answers, but the Admiralty's conclusion was vague. The ship had likely been caught in a sudden storm and sunk. For families, it was a cold comfort. Legends soon attached themselves to the loss. Some sailors claimed to see a phantom frigate in the mists of the Atlantic, resembling the Atalanta, her decks crowded with silent cadets. Others told of ghostly signals heard at night on the waves. Such tales could not be proven, but they captured the imagination of a public haunted by the mystery. To this day, the Atalanta's wreck has never been found. Advances in sonar and oceanography have mapped parts of the Atlantic, yet the vastness of the seabed still conceals her. For historians, her loss illustrates both the dangers of 19th century naval training and the limits of human control over nature. For storytellers, she remains a symbol of youthful ambition cut short, a vessel swallowed by the sea with no witness to speak her last moments. The HMS Atalanta is remembered as one of the Royal Navy's great mysteries, a ship once proud, turned into a school for sailors, then erased in silence. Her cadets never returned, her timbers never seen again. Only the ocean knows where she lies, and the Atlantic, as always, keeps its secrets. The vanishing of the HMS Resolute. In 1854, the HMS Resolute was abandoned in ice. 2 years later, she was found drifting thousands of miles away, intact. How the frozen ship freed herself remains unanswered. The story of the Resolute begins in the mid-19th century. During the Great Age of Arctic exploration, Britain had invested heavily in expeditions to map the northern passages and to search for the ill-fated Franklin expedition, which had vanished in 1845 while attempting to navigate the Northwest Passage. Among the ships dispatched on these rescue missions was the Resolute, a sturdy wooden vessel originally built as a bark and converted for polar service. Reinforced with extra timbers and equipped for long voyages in ice, she embodied the Royal Navy's determination to master the Arctic. In 1852, the Resolute set sail under Captain Henry Kellett as part of a squadron tasked with searching for Franklin's lost men. For 2 years she battled shifting pack ice, endured endless nights of freezing cold, and sailed into waters few Europeans had ever seen. But in 1854, her fortune ran out. Trapped in unyielding floes near Viscount Melville Sound, her crew faced dwindling provisions and deteriorating conditions. With no hope of release before another brutal winter, Captain Kellett made the decision. The ship must be abandoned. Her crew marched across the ice to join other rescue ships, leaving the Resolute locked fast, her decks coated with frost, her rigging entombed in snow. To them, she was finished another wooden grave in the Arctic, condemned to be crushed and sunk by the shifting pressure of the floes. But the Arctic had other plans. Against all expectations, the Resolute did not break apart. Over the course of 2 years, she drifted, carried slowly but steadily by shifting ice and ocean currents. Somehow, without men aboard, she slipped free of her frozen prison. Her sails shredded, her wheel unmanned, she moved silently across thousands of miles of icy sea. In September 1855, the American whaling ship George Henry, operating off Baffin Island, spotted an unusual silhouette on the horizon. As they approached, they discovered an intact vessel, empty yet seaworthy. It was the Resolute. Though weathered and scarred by ice, she was afloat, her stores largely preserved, her cabins eerie in their orderliness. Her logbooks told of abandonment years earlier. Her survival seemed almost miraculous. The Resolute was towed to New London, Connecticut, where she became an object of fascination. How had she freed herself? What forces had carried her across such distances without sinking? Scientists studied currents and ice flows, but no single explanation satisfied every question. For many, her journey was less a matter of physics than of mystery, a ship that refused to die. The story gained a diplomatic dimension. In 1856, as a gesture of goodwill, the United States restored the Resolute at government expense and returned her to Britain. She was welcomed with ceremony, Celebrated as both survivor and symbol, for decades she served again in the Royal Navy before being retired in 1879. Her timbers, however, gained an afterlife. When she was broken up, Queen Victoria ordered desks fashioned from her oak. One of these, presented to the United States, became the famous Resolute desk. Placed in the White House and still used by American presidents today, another desk was given to the British monarch, ensuring her legacy lived on in more than memory. Yet the central question remains unanswered. How did the Resolute, abandoned and frozen solid, free herself to drift intact across the Arctic? Did shifting flows release her gently, currents guiding her into open water, or was her survival simply improbable luck, a rare convergence of ice, wind and tide? The Resolute remains both artifact and enigma. She carried no crew when she completed her greatest voyage, yet she travelled farther than any could have imagined. Her survival shaped not only maritime history, but also political symbolism. Still, her ghostly drifting across the ice remains unexplained, a reminder that the sea and the ice that crowns it can turn abandonment into legend. The Rosalie and the abandoned deck. In 1840, the French ship Rosalie was found adrift. Cargo was untouched, sails set, galley warm, but her crew and passengers gone. The mystery of the Rosalie is one of those 19th century sea stories that drifts on the edge of fact and legend, passed down through fragmented reports and maritime journals. She was a merchant vessel flying the French flag, en route from Hamburg to Havana, carrying a mixed cargo of trade goods. With her were passengers bound for the Caribbean and a crew accustomed to the rigours of Atlantic crossings. She was last sighted in good condition, sails trimmed neatly, her voyage apparently proceeding without incident. Weeks later, another vessel encountered her drifting near the Azores, silent against the wind. Her sails were still rigged, though weather-worn. At first glance it seemed she was underway, as if men still steered her course. But as the boarding party climbed onto her deck, silence confirmed otherwise. The ship was deserted. Every living soul had vanished, leaving no sign of struggle. Below deck, the galley was in order, food set out as though in preparation for a meal. Cargo stores were untouched. Personal belongings, trunks, clothes, even valuables remained neatly arranged. The logbook, which might have revealed a final clue, was missing. For those who first entered her, the experience was unsettling. The Rosalie felt abandoned mid-action, like a stage suddenly emptied of actors. What disaster, they wondered, had struck a ship in such apparent order? Theories abounded. One suggestion was sudden illness, perhaps cholera or yellow fever sweeping through the crew and passengers. In panic, survivors might have attempted to flee in boats, leaving the ship to wander. Yet no lifeboats were found drifting nearby, no bodies washed ashore. Others proposed mutiny, though again the absence of violence or looting argued against it. Another possibility was weather. Rogue waves or sudden squalls could have struck, perhaps sweeping sailors overboard and leaving the rest unable to control the vessel. But with her sails set and her rigging intact, she showed no signs of catastrophic storm damage. Some accounts describe the Rosalie as a vessel marked by eerie stillness, drifting with purpose yet lacking life. Sailors whispered that she was a cursed ship, abandoned under circumstances never meant to be explained. In later retellings, she became linked to the broader lore of ghost ships vessels, like the Mary Celeste decades later, which echoed her enigma almost detail for detail. Historians struggle with the case because official records are scant. Unlike the Mary Celeste, which generated inquiries and press reports, the Rosalie's mystery survives primarily in fragmented maritime notices and reprinted accounts. Some argue that her story was exaggerated, her details embellished in the retelling. Others hold that she was very real, a vanished community whose fate the Atlantic swallowed whole. Regardless of embellishment, her image endures. A ship adrift with sails taut, cargo secure, galley still warm, yet utterly deserted. The absence of violence, fire, or wreckage makes her mystery sharper. It is not what was found aboard that haunts the imagination, but what was missing the human presence that should have animated her decks. The Rosalie joined the catalogue of 19th century mysteries that sailors carried with them as warnings. She was a reminder that even well-built ships, with capable crews and calm seas, could dissolve into silence. To this day, no certain explanation exists. Was it sickness, mutiny, or some unknown force at sea? Only the abandoned deck remains in memory, frozen in time like an unfinished story, its ending lost to the waves. The Kazuko Maru's sudden silence. Japanese fishing trawler Kazuko Maru vanished mid-catch in 1955. Nets half-hauled, decks empty. No storm was recorded, no SOS sent. The Kazuko Maru was one of countless Japanese fishing vessels that plied the Pacific in the years after World War II. Part of the nation's determined effort to rebuild its economy through industry and the sea. A sturdy trawler, she was not a grand liner or warship, but a working vessel, manned by fishermen accustomed to long hours and harsh conditions. The sea was both livelihood and danger, but to vanish without trace was rare, even in those uncertain years. In early 1955, the Kazuko Maru departed port on a routine fishing voyage. She carried her crew of seasoned men and set out into waters well known to them. The Pacific that week was calm, weather reports indicating fair skies and steady winds. Other vessels in the same region reported normal conditions, their radios alive with chatter, but then the voice of the Kazuko Maru went silent. Days later, another trawler spotted her adrift. From a distance, she appeared normal, nets trailing in the water, her hull steady against the swell. But as rescuers boarded, an eerie tableau revealed itself. Nets were half-hauled, lines still taut, as though the crew had been in the midst of their work when interrupted. Below deck, galley utensils were laid out, meals half-prepared. Cabins contained clothing, gear, and personal belongings. Yet not a single fisherman remained aboard. The radio was functional, but no distress call had been sent. There were no signs of fire, no damage from collision, no evidence of struggle. The ship's logs stopped abruptly the day of her silence, giving no clue to her fate. Even the ship's clock ticked on, as though nothing had happened. Authorities opened an inquiry. Theories ranged widely. Some investigators suspected sudden poisoning carbon monoxide from faulty equipment or fumes from the engine room. Yet, if that were the case, why would the crew not collapse aboard? Others argued they had abandoned ship in panic, perhaps fearing a leak or unseen hazard. But lifeboats were still in place, securely fastened. Whispers of more sinister causes grew. Could pirates have seized the crew and left the vessel intact? But piracy was rare in those waters at the time, and valuable equipment and cargo remained untouched. Mutiny was also suggested, though again, no evidence of violence supported the claim. One unsettling theory pointed to sudden rogue waves. Fishermen might have been swept overboard while hauling nets, leaving no one to control the vessel. But for an entire crew to vanish in this way seemed improbable, especially when other vessels reported calm seas. In the absence of clear evidence, speculation turned to the mysterious. Some seafarers linked the Kazuko Maru to the lore of the Devil's Sea, also known as the Dragon's Triangle, a region of the Pacific south of Japan long associated with unexplained vanishings. Much like the Bermuda Triangle of the Atlantic, it was said to swallow ships without warning, pulling them into silence. Though scientists dismiss such claims as coincidence or exaggeration, the unexplained state of the trawler fed such beliefs. After thorough inspection, the vessel was eventually towed back to port. But the mystery of her crew remained unsolved. Families received no remains, no closure. The ship herself was repaired and, by some accounts, even returned to service, but the shadow of her empty voyage clung to her name. The Kazuko Maru remains a little-known ghost ship, her story eclipsed by more famous cases like the Mary Celeste. Yet for those who study maritime enigmas, she is a sharp reminder that mysteries are not confined to distant centuries or remote oceans. Even in the mid-20th century, with radios, modern engines and weather forecasting, a vessel could still slip into silence. Why her crew vanished will never be known. The Pacific is vast, and the sea keeps its secrets. All that remains is the haunting image. Nets half-hauled, decks quiet, a working ship abandoned mid-task as though time itself had paused, and then erased the men who laboured there. The Jian Seng drifting tanker. In 2006, Australian patrols found the Jian Seng, an empty tanker drifting with engines off. No crew, no registration, no answers. To this day, no origin is known. The discovery of the Jian Seng unfolded in the Gulf of Carpentaria, a vast and remote stretch of water off northern Australia. Patrol aircraft first sighted the vessel in March 2006, drifting silently with no lights, no signals and no visible crew. Australian customs vessels were dispatched to investigate, uncertain whether they were approaching a simple derelict, a smuggling operation gone wrong, or something more sinister. When boarding parties climbed onto her deck, they were met with silence. The ship was large, a tanker of more than 80 meters in length but lifeless. No crew waited to greet them, no captain stood with logbook in hand. The vessel's name, Jian Seng, was painted across her hull, but no registration number accompanied it. In maritime law, such numbers are mandatory, identifying a ship's flag, owner, and records of service. Here, there was nothing. The deeper investigators looked, the stranger the ship appeared. Her engine room was quiet. Power long since cut. Supplies were sparse but not entirely absent. Empty rice bags lay scattered, suggesting her last role may have been provisioning smaller ships at sea. But no paperwork, no logbooks, no documents of ownership remained. Her radio equipment had been stripped. Even her navigation charts were missing. How does a tanker of that size simply appear, drifting in Australian waters without origin? Authorities searched international databases for a record of the Jian Seng. None was found. Flags of convenience, often used by shipping companies to conceal true ownership, might explain inconsistencies, but even these vessels leave some trace in registries. The Jian Seng appeared to exist outside the system. Speculation multiplied. Some suggested she was a mothership used in smuggling or illegal fishing, abandoned once no longer profitable. Others believed she had been on her way to a scrapyard when tow lines failed, left to wander without crew. A darker theory proposed she was engaged in clandestine activities, trafficking, smuggling fuel before being deliberately stripped and set adrift. Yet the most unsettling element was her emptiness. If she had simply broken loose while under tow, where was the evidence of salvage markings? If her crew had abandoned her due to mechanical failure, why remove all identification documents? And if she had been used for smuggling, why leave a vessel of such value adrift to draw attention? Australian authorities faced a decision. To tow her into port would mean assuming responsibility for a vessel of uncertain ownership and questionable seaworthiness. Ultimately, the government declared the Jian Seng a derelict hazard to navigation. After weeks of examination, she was towed offshore and scuttled in deep water, her steel hull sinking beneath the surface with no ceremony. But scuttling did not erase the questions. To this day, maritime historians, journalists, and sailors debate her origin. Some claim she may have been Chinese-owned, her name suggesting a Mandarin route. Others argue she may have been Indonesian, connected to the shadowy networks of illegal fishing vessels that operate throughout the region. With no records, no survivors, and no witnesses, her story ends in silence. For Australia, the Jian Seng raised uncomfortable realities. Even in the 21st century, with satellites mapping the seas and global registries tracking commercial fleets, It was possible for a tanker-sized vessel to exist outside all systems of accountability. Her presence was a reminder that the oceans remain vast, and not everything upon them is known. In the years since, she has taken her place among the world's ghost ships, modern, steel-built, and yet as mysterious as the wooden derelicts of centuries past. No storm sank her, no battle scarred her hull. She appeared without origin and disappeared by deliberate sinking, her questions unanswered. The sea holds her secret still. Who crewed her? Why she was abandoned? And from where she came, a mystery is now resting with the deep. The enduring mystery of seafaring vanishings, from schooners to supertankers, from wooden hulls to steel giants, the ocean keeps its secrets. Each disappearance leaves a pattern. Calm seas, sudden silence, and a final unanswered question echoing across the waves. For as long as humans have ventured across the oceans, they have vanished upon them. The stories reach back centuries, when wooden ships with canvas sails braved uncharted seas and sometimes never returned. They continue into the age of steam, of steel, and even the satellite-monitored present, where vast tankers and modern aircraft can still disappear without explanation. Technology has advanced, yet the sea's ability to conceal has never diminished. The pattern is unsettlingly familiar. Ships often depart in routine fashion, their crews confident, their holds full of cargo, their courses plotted. Weather is reported as calm, seas manageable. Then, silence. No distress call, no sudden SOS, no frantic transmission over the radio. Days or weeks later, the vessel may be found drifting empty, meals half prepared, logs stopped mid-sentence. Sometimes nothing is ever found, no wreckage, no survivors, only speculation. Take the Mary Celeste of 1872, the schooner discovered intact with her crew gone. Or the Marine Sulphur Queen in 1963, a modern tanker leaving behind nothing but scattered life jackets. In each case, investigators struggled to explain the absence. Pirates would have seized cargo, mutiny would have left signs of struggle, storms would have left wreckage. Instead, the ships themselves or the lack of them whispered of mysteries deeper than mere accident. Even when wrecks are discovered, they rarely settle the questions. The SS Waratah, known as Australia's Titanic, vanished in 1909 with 211 aboard. Despite decades of searches, her wreck remains undiscovered, the South African seabed holding her secret. The MV Derbyshire, a giant of British shipping, was eventually found 15,000 feet deep in the Pacific, but her sheer size makes the speed of her loss puzzling even today. Discovery provides fragments of truth, but rarely the full story. Sailors and scientists have long offered explanations. Rogue waves, once dismissed as sailors' fantasy, are now recognized as real walls of water capable of tearing even large ships apart. Electromagnetic anomalies, particularly in regions like the Bermuda Triangle, have been studied for their possible effects on navigation equipment. Carbon monoxide poisoning, sudden hull breaches, or cargo shifts all provide plausible theories. Yet none explains every detail, every silence, every vanished soul. What endures is ambiguity. The sea does not reveal easily. A ship that sinks in deep water may never be found, hidden in canyons of the seabed. A crew lost overboard may never resurface. Even in an era of GPS, satellites, and constant monitoring, gaps remain wide enough for ships to vanish still. But perhaps what unsettles most is not the physical loss, but the human absence. To walk aboard an abandoned vessel is to feel the weight of unfinished lives. Meals left untouched, beds unmade, a dog barking on deck, nets half-hauled. These details speak louder than silence. They remind us that disappearance is not only about ships, but about people whose stories ended without closure. The ocean has always been both pathway and abyss. It connects nations, carries trade, and sustains life. Yet it also conceals. Beneath its surface lie wrecks from every century, each carrying the imprint of lives cut short, each holding questions unanswered. From schooners caught in sudden storms to tankers adrift without crew, these vanishings remind us of the limits of human knowledge. The sea is mapped, but not mastered. For every explanation offered, another gap in the record remains. And so the pattern continues. Calm seas, sudden silence. The unanswered question, echoing across waves, carried into the future. The ocean remembers, but it does not tell.